Emergency.
I'm on the road to Arapika from US 19, and there's a dead body on the side of the road. I was driving down the road, and I seen a body, and I turned around because sometimes deers look like bodies.
911, what is the address of the emergency?
I'm down by Old Dixie behind Seapine. I just killed someone.
How did that happen?
I just hit him.
Hit him with what?
My car.
What was his name?
I don't know his name. I don't know what's wrong with me, sir. What's wrong with me?
Okay, I'm going to need you to either wait there or go back to the scene for the deputies. Okay?
I'm by my car right now.
Was he walking down the road? You just accidentally hit him, or what happened?
No, I intentionally hit him. Is it wrong not to feel anything, just shock?
It's not a typical 911 call. I think there are definitely times when the individual is experiencing what I would call transitory guilt. He even describes feeling shock. But it makes it transitory because it doesn't last very long. This statement about not feeling anything is preceded with, what's wrong with me, right? Is it wrong? And the reality is that he is totally and completely self-aware that the impulse that he just had to run this person down was totally and completely wrong. The compulsion was such that he needed to do it.
Yeah. Guy calling said he hit him on purpose. You hear that? Oh, did he? Yeah. That's why he's on Old Dixie. He called saying he hit him.
You're directly across from him?
Yes,
are you
sir.
in the woods, or where are you?
I'm in the woods, but
You're in the woods?
I'm in a little bit of a clearing.
Hello? Right here.
I called him over.
What's that? I couldn't hear.
Something to get off my mind. How
It's not showing that
How was my day?
was it good?
My day was perfect, bro.
What would be your advice for
How's
my
that a
parents?
PH10 status check?
What do you mean?
PH10.
I want to ask you, see if I can call my mother, but I know how she gets.
I wouldn't call anybody right now. You honestly, bro, you don't really even have to call anybody because you're over 18.
I know that.
No, which I totally understand. Let's just wait for a little bit and wait for the detectives to get here, and then they can say, hey, you can call your mom, not call your mom, whatever.
I think I'm just not telling her about this piece. But then she's very.
He's sort of downplaying the whole situation. He's asking police, what do you think I can tell my mom? Again, sort of like he is friends with them and they're gonna help him sort of circumvent the whole situation here. He's minimizing them because he's out of tune with what's actually going on, which is the key feature of psychopathy. They don't register empathy or emotions, and that coupled with a lack of moral compass allows them to not display remorse for what they did and kill and engage in violent acts.
We came here because we wanted to see if check you out, make sure you're okay. We wanted to see if you could answer a couple of questions. Would that be okay?
Of course.
Okay. Let's go back over here and we'll have a little chat, okay?
Do you work, Justin?
Just got hired today.
Okay. And were you en route to somewhere specific today?
No, sir.
You were just driving to drive?
After I left, I don't know, my thoughts. I just felt really angry.
It really seems like Pinnell experienced a narcissistic wound here. He lost his job, so it seems like he experiences anger from this, and he doesn't really know what to do with it. When a psychopath experiences a narcissistic wound, it essentially bounces off them, and they will put it towards someone else. Whereas more of a neurotypical person, when we experience a narcissistic wound, we feel it deep inside, and it causes sadness, perhaps some anger, but it's often directed inward. Whereas a psychopath is going to direct it mostly outward on other people, and they're going to direct their anger to whoever's around them.
I just couldn't think of anything. It kept, it's like, I won't say I'm hearing voices, it's just, it just kept sounding like I should kill someone, I should kill someone. Maybe it might make me feel better, maybe it might make me happier. And so recently I've been driving around these roads I know that people occasionally walk on and looking for people I could hit while avoiding witnesses. I don't know why I want to do this. I also just wanted to calm down. I was just having some mental issues. I didn't end up going to work. Later throughout the day, I ended up getting a call from I believe my manager. And he told me to call my boss. I was having a bit of what feels like an anxiety attack to me sometimes. I would say anxiety attack. I just was feeling stressed. And then he told me to meet him in the office. Met him in the office. He told me I was fired and gave me my 2 checks from last week and whatever I worked for this week, which was, I believe, 9 hours. So I drove around, and then I decided to sit here for a bit, just eating. I wasn't really waiting for anyone. I was just eating because I was hungry. Yeah, where you see the car got into the accident, but it wasn't. Anyways, I was just parked here, just eating, watching some YouTube videos, and I decided to drive again and look for someone to hit. I ended up going down Arepica. That's when I saw the old guy with the cane, and then I made a U-turn. He was going into the grass. He was trying to avoid me because he saw me going for him, but I just went for him.
He says he feels stressed. He says that he's potentially experiencing anxiety attack. It's another element where I think it's important for people to understand that a psychopath feels emotions. They just don't feel emotions the way that other people typically do. What I think it is that he's prone to boredom. What I think it is that he has a need for stimulation. And the feelings that he gets about taking someone's life, potentially making him happier.
Okay. So you were approaching him and he was approaching you. And you swerved over.
Yeah.
Hit him, and I can see it, he must have hit your passenger side. And did you at all hit your brakes, or you just kept going, or did you accelerate?
I was accelerating to hit him, and then when I hit him, I was trying to brake, but when I realized the brakes were broken, I just tried my best to try to find something I could crash into to try to stop the car.
Did you hear him say anything?
I only saw his reaction.
What was that?
You know, that moment?
What were your thoughts like when that were right at that moment? Do you remember?
I just smiled and laughed.
He enjoys the harm that he is inflicting, which is certainly an element of sadism. And I think he didn't recognize how much he was going to enjoy it, which is why he smiled and laughed, even though he could recognize that Pratt was dying. So there's certainly an element where even though he is not engaging in a prolonged sense of torture of Pratt, he would have if he could, but the pole prevented that prolonging.
How fast do you think you were going when you struck him?
Maybe 50, possibly even 70.
And you had mentioned that you had thoughts of doing this. You wanted to do this.
It's really just for curiosity.
Okay.
But I figured if it was curiosity, it would probably relieve the stress once I figured it out, how it would feel.
Is this the only way you imagined doing it, or had you imagined doing it in other methods? Like some other way?
I mean, I had I'm really fun with knives. I was thinking about slicing people up and cutting them open, dissecting them, essentially.
Yeah.
But you've never done that before?
No.
He's not entirely sophisticated on how he's going to act out his fantasy. He talked about wanting to dissect people, his fascination with knives, but he didn't do that here. He used his car sort of like he's a little detached from the person. It's not up close and personal, and that's because I don't think he was ready yet. I think this was sort of his first go at killing somebody.
Okay. So our forensic techs are here. What we'll do is we'll step out real quick. We'll let them take some pictures of you. I'm going to call my supervisor and update him on what's going on, and then we'll go from there, okay?
I don't mean to smile and laugh in this situation. I'm just trying to not think about it.
When you were thinking about, like, maybe possibly hitting somebody, did you think at all to yourself thought process with that?
Finish them off.
Okay.
Like I said, I had an interest in wanting to dissect people. Well, let's just say I answered one question I was wanting to answer, which was what it felt like to kill someone.
How does it feel?
I mean, when I did it, I was laughing. I mean, I enjoyed it, but afterwards, after I calmed down a bit, I wouldn't say I felt regretful. I mean, to be perfectly honest, I was more ashamed that I broke the car the way I did than I killed a person. Like, I was shocked the fact that I was thinking about hitting bicyclists because the fact that I see them more often than walkers. But then I figured, oh no, then my car's gonna get damaged and I can't really cover that up.
More damage with a bicycle, you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I thought the bicycle was gonna cause more damage than me hitting the person. And when I ended up hitting the individual, I didn't expect that kind of damage.
Is he placing more value on the car rather than on a human life? Yes, he is, but he's doing it for a very specific reason. He's doing it because both things are objects that can be disposed of. But the car is his object, one that he would choose not to dispose of if he didn't have to. He cares more about what's his and cares less about what isn't his. In either scenario, it's still just an object.
You ever, like, Googled it or watched videos on it to see what it's like or anything like that?
I just like looking at the dead bodies. I tend to get a little hungry when I see a dead body. Not that I want to eat it. I just never could explain that. I just see a dead body and I get hungry and that's it.
Hungry, like?
Which oddly enough, I eat food and then feel like I want to hit something, want to kill something.
We see Pinnell talking to officers about how he gets hungry when he thinks about killing. He's describing this behavioral concept called conditioning. So when you're doing two different things at once, like two stimuli are paired together, then you get a conditioned response. So when he tells the officers that he sort of has this hunger and feels like he wants something to eat, it's probably because he usually does eat while he's watching these horrific videos and thinking about killing.
What do you think your mom and your dad are going to say when we talk to them? Or if we end up talking to them? Do you think, like, you're going to have to tell them, obviously, that you damaged your car. So, like, what do you think?
I hit the deer. Not. I wish that was the case. At least in this way, it's like, oh, that's no big deal. You hit a deer.
Yeah.
It's kind of funny how people brush a killing of an animal off more easily than they do of a human.
Right.
Unless you go to, like, something like, say, a PETA and you murder a cat in front of them, oh, then you're going to raise all kinds of hell. But aside from that, any normal person would easily shrug off an animal's death versus a human death, which ironically enough, humans are technically animals.
I think here he is being a little bit more theatrical. He's expanding on his fantasy, really, that he's had for this long time. And I think he's doing that because he wants to get that rise possibly out of officers, and also it gives him excitement himself. So you can hear at that point that he does not have any regard for human life. Pretty typical of Psychopath. And he wants to just compare brushing off a human life just as easily as he brushes off an animal life.
Have you ever told anybody about your thoughts with this kind of stuff, about wanting to kind of do this out of curiosity, hit somebody or use a knife or anything?
I did try to talk about it with some of my own families, or yeah, not my family, it's my parents. I happen to have them, well, I have them all the time, but they're mainly directed towards, my boys and my school, during my school years, specifically in middle school. That was the worst of it, at least. I'm grateful that it wasn't the worst.
Is there any questions you have of us, or anything that we didn't discuss with you about, today, or anything that you think is important for us to know or you want to talk about?
I mean, I was really nervous of talking with you guys about my school life because that typically is a bit of a sensitive area for me.
Sorry.
I mean, I have a lot of stories to share about it, but if it has to pertain to the crime, then I'd rather just do that.
It makes a lot of sense in a way that he would have a lot easier time talking about the murder because that is something that he wanted to do. That's a choice that he made. That's something that he laughed and thought was kind of fun. Whereas talking about even the grades he got in school was making him very angry and upset and dejected. And it doesn't make sense to a neurotypical person why that would happen, but to him, in the way that he's thinking about it, I think it made all the sense in the world.
Were you hitting this person to hurt them, or were you hitting them to kill them?
Intention to kill me. I don't really want someone to suffer. I mean, I don't know about you, but if I had the choice of suffering before I die or just dying, I'd pick the dying route.
Yeah.
Like, I'd rather have you just probably even just slit my throat, because that would be the closest thing I would think of torturing someone. I don't believe in the fact that of torturing the victim. If I killed him, at least this way he didn't die suffering. Because how I see it is, if I'm going to die, I'd rather have someone just outright kill me, not just make it suffering. I mean, it's one thing to struggle, in which case you're suffering, making yourself suffer, but different story if you're like, okay, I accept it, kill me now. I mean, of course, I'm not saying that justifies murder.
Because Pennell doesn't view torture psychologically. He views it as physical. He doesn't view the fact that when he's going 50 to 70 miles an hour, that Pratt sees his impending death. When he crashes through the windshield and Pennell can see his face and Pennell is laughing at him, he doesn't see that as torture because he doesn't view torture that way. For him, all of this stuff was just a quick end to Pratt. When the reality is that Pratt suffered a lot, and Pennell doesn't care.
Did he ever make any statements that he wanted to harm himself or others?
Never himself. He has said he would just he's curious, but never followed through or anything like that.
Curious about what?
Curious what it would be like to kill somebody.
He said that to you before?
Yeah, but he said it on and off throughout growing up. You know what I'm saying? And he's never.
That's kind of. Do you think that's kind of a bizarre?
Well,
statement?
then yeah. Well, just recently I was like, well, should we look into getting you help or everything? When he was 13, because he threatened. He said he felt like killing the whole entire family and just running away.
Was he interested in true crime stuff as well?
No, he doesn't really get into it with me or anything. He'll just talk about it or how they die and stuff like that. He doesn't process things normal.
Okay.
I don't how you have compassion for other people or things. He doesn't have that.
Pennell's mother really highlights that this hasn't been just a recent problem. This wasn't necessarily a impulsive.
All right. So you have a coworker who didn't show up at work.
Yeah. And I was texting with Steve this whole time. The only thing that struck me weird is that he wasn't being more directive, just super duper pump.
So Steve comes to your work.
He came and was just emotional and hysterical. He just said, something bad happened this morning. And then he said that Manya broke her neck in the shower while he was changing Oliver, and he panicked. So he said he cut her up. He's on probation, so that's why he was scared. He said he put her in bags and put her in my garage and put a blanket over her. And he said, don't turn me in, and I can't go back to prison.
What we do know about Mr. Johnson is that, at the age of 18, he was convicted of rape and served 10 years in prison for that. Knowing his history and then hearing this story in the context of a missing person situation is the fact that, the story already doesn't really fit together, right? She broke her neck in the shower, like you would have a reaction to that. But then the response being like, oh, so I cut her up and put her in several different storage bins. It's just such a disconnect. But then when you add in the layer of like, this is somebody who has a history of disregard for somebody else's bodily autonomy, that's the piece that sort of, I think, is most relevant.
He gets distressed a little bit whenever he's picked up by the police to be interviewed. But until then, he's really not doing much about his wife missing. That leads into this idea that he has this mask, so to speak, of being one person, this caring, loving, doting husband and father. But in reality, there's a very different side to him underneath that mask.
Thanks for waiting.
How are you? Good.
Obviously, we're here to try to help in locating your wife. We just want to gather as much information as we can. And she's never kind of gone off like this before, never gone to visit family before.
When Claudine texted me, that's when I got concerned.
Sure. What kind of things were you guys checking?
I just had, I don't know. I went to Nate's work.
He's trying to figure out how he wants to play this. He's neither paying attention to what's going on around him, nor is he really paying attention to his kind of feelings and emotions, which we probably suspect that he probably doesn't have the ones that we might be expecting for somebody whose wife is missing. But it's more like he's trying to figure things out, and that's like occupying so much of his computing power that he's got to put the rest of the stuff just on autopilot.
Okay, who's Nate?
Oh, he's a friend of mine, but Manya doesn't like him. I started smoking a little bit when I was around him, and she was upset about that, and casually drinking, and the casino thing. We go to the casino sometimes together.
Okay.
So he's said some things about her in the past.
Okay.
So when I was getting anxious, where is she? She's missing. I went and confronted him.
And the first thing you did was drive up to see Nate.
That was I was thinking about who doesn't like Manya? Everybody loves Manya.
I went into his work and I said, Ron is missing. Do you know anything about it? And he just was like a blank stare, and he's like, no, why? Like, he doesn't really care.
The fact that he uses the phrase, he doesn't really care, is the almost dictionary irony, and that he probably has no connection to it. But, you know, he's, again, probably in his mind trying to implicate his friend and just sort of tossed off this phrase. But from what we know about what happened, it is incredibly poignant for him to use those words, because he's the one who doesn't seem to care.
We just wanted to find out what your thoughts are, where we maybe could start, all that kind of good stuff. When she went missing, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, well, we had a birthday party last night with my family.
Your wife doesn't really love the gambling aspect. Does that irritate her when you go gamble and stuff?
No, she doesn't like it, and that's one of the reasons why Nate and her don't get along.
Do you fib a little bit about what you're doing sometimes?
There's been a couple times where I've went that I didn't tell her.
It's kind of like he's decided, I'm gonna have this very sort of poster child perfect family life, but I still want to do what I want when I want to do it. And so I'm going to sneak off and have that thrill seeking and that indulgence, because, you know, that's what we know psychopaths crave. They want that stimulation. They want to have that gratification. So he's going to do what he wants, but the way that he's sort of utilized his charisma, if you will, is to kind of have created these two separate lives that he gets to live kind of almost in parallel.
We believe that you are definitely involved in what happened to her. We believe that we've located her, okay? We have talked to Nate. We don't think that you meant for this to happen, Steve.
It doesn't matter anymore. None of the new prison for the rest of my life.
You guys arguing about Nate? About the casino?
No, it was about Nate. Are we doing this? Is this happening?
Tell us what happened last night.
We've been fighting for a long time. And, I don't know, I love her, and just, I don't know, I think I'm selfish. She's selfish. It's tit for tat. Keeping track of wrongs, and it just gets exhausting, and just letting the little things get to me and get irritated, but I didn't plan it.
Even though he's the perpetrator, he actually seems like he's trying to elicit some sympathy. But it's interesting because here he is accused of murdering her, yet he's talking negatively about some of her characteristics that he perceives.
Tell us how it happened last night.
Well, she found a bottle of vodka after church, and she was just irate. I know my family was coming. She wasn't talking to me at all. She gets so cold, and it hurts. And she's a wonderful person, but she can really cut deep and is quick to call names.
When he says her words hurt and she's so cold, it really seems like a narcissistic injury. His fragile ego is getting impaled by these cold words that she's saying. And when Johnson is constantly talking about what she was doing to him, He's trying to portray this victim scenario, and he's trying to really curate what the detectives are thinking about him and saying, okay, this is a man who was at his wit's end because his wife was trying to be overly controlling of him.
She was gonna leave. She was gonna take Oliver with her. And I mean, she's threatened many times before, and she's even said before, do you think you'll get any custody? Do you think I'll get full custody? And she, just really, and she's right. I mean, she has the card. No, I'll never see him again. Or her again. But I didn't problem solve. I was getting angry and wanted some control. How did it happen, Steve? I'll come back to that. I should have panicked, but then I'll have to live with that for the rest of my life, even if I could have gotten away. This is it. What's county jail gonna be like this time around?
He can't help but see things through the lens of his own interest, because I think he's trying to come across as sympathetic by kind of acknowledging, like, oh, what have I done? But then it has that narcissistic overlay because it's told in that way of like, I lost this, as opposed to like, what have I done to her family? But he just can't help himself. He just can't get out of his own point of view.
So back to that. So she's trying to pack Oliver and get his shoes on, and it's heinous. It's despicable. It's gruesome. It's incomprehensible. It happened so fast. I just wanted to threaten her. I wanted to have a card on my sleeve too. So her family and job and a life and a house and fun cars and freedom. It's done. But to not focus on me. She's like, I should have done this a long time ago. I know the type of person you are.
Kind of hurtling insults left and right.
I went to the bedroom to grab the gun. She's not going to take my family away from me. And I wanted just to scare her or just, I don't know, feel powerful.
The truest things he said, but most kind of direct from the psychopath's mouth. I was angry, I wanted some control. And sort of, well, she had the card. I think the baby represented sort of a trophy in a way. Like he didn't want her to be able to exert that kind of mastery over the situation. And if anybody's going to be in control, it's supposed to be him. And I think that's what he found difficult to tolerate.
And I was in the bathroom and she was in the other room, and as she walked by for the last time to get Oliver from his room, that's when I pulled the trigger.
Where did you shoot her?
On the head.
And what did you do?
I couldn't even believe it. And she just buckled. I hit the floor.
At what point did you bring her into the bathroom and cut her up?
Right away. Put her in the tub, yeah. The shower there.
What did you use to cut her up?
A circular saw. When the skill saw wasn't working, that's when I took a break and I took Oliver and was going to get a rotary saw.
What all did you buy at Menards?
a rotary saw.
The separation between what he does and his actions after, especially when he is in Menards, that just sticks out to me the most. He doesn't look stressed. The level of callousness, the lack of responsibility or emotion that goes along with that is almost unfathomable.
I actually didn't know what to do, and then this is where I panicked, and I planned on trying to dispose of the body. Just, I mean, I've always been, you know, there's a good side of me and a bad side of me, and I just, okay, how can I get away with this now? I put everything in the garage initially. I knew eventually, even soon, you know, I'm gonna get questioned with my history, and people are gonna wanna look around, and so I had to get them out of my house for at least, I don't know, at least a while. So the only person I could think of, which now I was completely wrong, but he did the right thing, was me. It's a wonderful family. Please take care of Oliver. Please give him equal time between the families. That was a really big point of contention with Maya. Now I took the two of us out of the picture. Just, there's nothing I can do to turn back the clock. I mean, saying you're sorry it's just words.
He's talking at the end about, I'm sorry, just being words. But the way he has been talking throughout this entire interview seems like just words. It's not clear that there's remorse or true sorrow for what he has done. And there's no indication that Johnson has any amount of empathy for the pain that he has caused and will have caused his son as his son gets older and realizes what's happened, but also the pain that he's caused both families, whom he just described as wonderful.
For psychopaths, they exist in the world solely seeking out their own interests. And so...
The phone rang just after midnight, the kind of shrill, mechanical cry that slices through a sleeping house and leaves something cold behind. On the other end was a voice that had not belonged to the badge in nearly a decade. Retired Detective Harold Boone did not waste words. He said he knew who killed her. He said he had known for years. And by sunrise, a Texas town that had buried its secrets in 1987 was awake again, staring into the dark mouth of a cold case that refused to stay dead. It began on a road so quiet you could hear crickets echo across the flat fields. October 1987. The air dry. The sky stretched wide over Millfield, Texas, population barely 3,000. Friday night lights had just gone dim at the high school stadium. Teenagers were still laughing in parking lots. Pickup trucks idled under sodium lamps. Somewhere between the football field and her front porch, 17-year-old Clara Whitmore vanished. She was last seen walking alone, white sneakers dusted red from the dirt shoulder, denim jacket tied at her waist. A friend would later say Clara turned down Maple Street instead of waiting for a ride. It was a shortcut. 5 minutes, maybe 7. Long enough. When she didn't come home, her mother assumed she'd stayed over at a friend's house. By dawn, assumption curdled into dread. Clara's bed was untouched. Her closet door hung open. The house carried the thick silence of something wrong. By 8:12 a.m., Millfield police logged a missing persons report. By noon, They had volunteers combing ditches with sticks. They found her shoe first. It lay half-hidden in Johnson's Creek, wedged against a cluster of reeds, laces tangled like something had tried to pull it under. 50 yards downstream, they found Clara Whitmore. The official report would use words like blunt force trauma, defensive wounds, time of death estimated between 10:30 p.m. and 1 a.m. The townspeople used different words. Brutal, unthinkable, not here. Millfield had one grocery store, 2 churches, and a sheriff who had been elected 3 times without opposition. Violent crime was something that happened in Houston, in Dallas, on the television. Not beside Johnson's Creek. The crime scene photographs told a harsher story. Clara's fingernails were broken. There were fibers caught in her jacket. Tire impressions pressed deep into the mud near the bank. Detectives collected everything. Bagged it. Tagged it. Promised answers. The first 48 hours were a frenzy of flashing lights and notebook scribbles. Every teenage boy in town felt the weight of a deputy's stare. Roadblocks went up. Tips flooded in. A drifter seen near the highway. A blue pickup speeding toward Route 19. An argument overheard behind the bleachers. They brought in Clara's boyfriend, Jason Hale, 18, varsity linebacker, clean-cut, shaken. He said they'd argued that night. Nothing serious. She wanted to apply to colleges out of state. He didn't. He cried under fluorescent lights and swore he loved her. Polygraph. Inconclusive. They questioned the drifter. He had an alibi in Oklahoma. They tracked the blue pickup to a farmer hauling feed. Dead ends multiplied like weeds. Weeks turned to months. The FBI consulted. Forensics, limited by 1987 technology, produced partial fibers consistent with automotive carpeting. No match. A latent fingerprint lifted from Clara's bracelet clasp was too smudged to compare. The tire tracks were common brand. Thousands sold across Texas. The case began to cool. Winter settled over Millfield like a lid. Clara's funeral drew half the county. White casket. Closed. Her mother fainted before the final hymn. Her father stopped speaking to reporters. Yellow ribbons faded on oak trees. Detective Harold Boone did not let it go. Boone was already 20 years into the job in 1987. Thick mustache. Sunburned neck. Reputation for patience. He walked Maple Street so many times he could count cracks in the pavement from memory. He reconstructed Clara's last steps in his head. 17. 5'4". Trusting enough to walk alone in her own town. He believed the killer was local. Had to be. Someone who knew the shortcut. Someone who knew Friday nights meant noise, distraction. Someone who felt safe enough to dump a body in Johnson's Creek and sleep in their own bed before dawn. In 1988, a new lead surfaced. A mechanic named Earl Denton reported that a customer had brought in a pickup truck with a torn section of interior carpet and a dented front bumper the week after Clara's murder. The customer claimed he'd hit a deer. Denton remembered dried mud caked under the chassis. The customer's name, Raymond Cutter. Cutter was 32 in 1987. Divorced. Lived alone outside town limits. Worked construction jobs that kept him drifting in and out of Millfield. No violent record, but rumors clung to him. Temper. Drinking. Late-night drives. Boone brought him in. Cutter denied everything. Said the bumper dent was from a fence post. Said he replaced the carpet because his dog had chewed it. He laughed at the suggestion he'd even spoken to Clara Whitmore. She was a kid, he said. I don't mess with kids. No physical evidence tied him to the scene. No witness placed his truck on Maple Street. Without DNA technology advanced enough to test the trace samples collected, Boone's suspicion was just that, suspicion. The district attorney declined to file charges. By 1990, the file had grown thick but stagnant. Tips slowed to a trickle. Boone aged. New cases demanded attention. Millfield wanted to move on. Clara's bedroom remained untouched, a shrine behind a closed door. In 1995, advances in DNA testing reignited faint hope. The preserved evidence, fibers, scrapings from beneath Clara's fingernails, was sent to a state lab. Months passed. The results came back degraded, insufficient for a full profile. Another door closing with a soft, clinical click. Boone retired in 1998. At his retirement dinner, they praised his service, his integrity. They did not mention Clara Whitmore, but he thought about her as he packed his desk. He kept a copy of the case file, told himself it was for reference, told himself he needed closure. Years stacked quietly. Millfield grew by a few hundred residents. A new gas station. A stoplight. Children who had not been born in 1987 drove past Johnson's Creek without knowing what lay beneath the surface of local history. Raymond Cutter left town in 2001, moved to Arkansas, worked odd jobs, kept mostly to himself. And then, in the spring of 2007, something shifted. Boone was cleaning his garage when he found an old evidence photo tucked inside the Clara Whitmore file. It showed the tire impressions near the creek. He stared at it longer than he had in years. Something about the wear pattern tugged at him, an uneven groove along the outer ridge. He drove to a local mechanic he trusted, asked about tire models popular in the late 80s. They flipped through catalogs. One brand caught Boone's eye, an all-terrain model discontinued in 1989, known for a manufacturing defect that caused a regular wear along the outer edge. Boone remembered something Cutter had said in 1988. Offhand. Defensive. Those were just regular all-terrains. Cutter had insisted about his truck tires. Regular. But not quite. Boone dug deeper. He tracked down old service records from Denton's shop, long boxed in storage. One receipt listed a tire replacement for Raymond Cutter's pickup, dated October 14, 1987. 3 days after Clara's body was found. The brand matched the defective model. Still circumstantial. Still not enough. But Boone felt the old fire return. The case was not dead. It had been waiting. He called a former colleague still on the force. Shared what he'd found. At first, polite skepticism. Then interest. The preserved fingernail scrapings. Were they still viable? Technology had advanced again. Touch DNA analysis, now possible. The evidence was sent back to the lab in late 2007. Weeks later, the phone rang. A partial male DNA profile had been extracted from Clara's fingernails. Not complete, but strong enough to compare. Raymond Cutter had been arrested in Arkansas in 2003 for a bar fight. Standard procedure. DNA swab entered into Cody's. The profiles were consistent. Not a full match, but consistent enough to reopen a nightmare 20 years buried. Millfield did not know yet. The town slept under quiet skies, unaware that the past was moving again. That a retired detective's stubborn memory had cracked open a cold case, thought unsolvable. That by morning, deputies would be driving across state lines with a warrant in hand. Harold Boone stood in his kitchen, phone still warm against his ear, heart pounding like it had in 1987. He looked out at the Texas dark and whispered Clara Whitmore's name. Somewhere in Arkansas, Raymond Cutter was finishing a beer, unaware that the ghost of a 17-year-old girl was about to knock on his door. Dawn in Arkansas broke pale and indifferent, a thin gray light sliding across the porch of a rented bungalow where Raymond Cutter slept with a box fan humming in the window. He had grown heavier with age, softer around the jaw, but the eyes were the same, small, watchful, always calculating exits. At 6:14 a.m., tires crunched over gravel. 2 deputies from Texas stepped out first. An Arkansas state trooper followed. No sirens. No spectacle. Just the quiet gravity of a warrant signed after 20 years of silence. Cutter opened the door in a stained t-shirt and stared at the badges, as if they were a trick of the light. For a split second, something flickered across his face. Not confusion, not outrage. Recognition. The past had finally found him. They read the warrant. Capital murder. 1987, Clara Whitmore. He laughed once, sharp and brittle. That girl, he said. You've got to be kidding me. They cuffed him anyway. Back in Millfield, word traveled faster than official statements. By the time the noon bell rang at the high school, parents were already calling each other. The name Raymond Cutter, spoken in grocery aisles and church parking lots decades earlier in whispers, was suddenly back in daylight. Shock rippled through the town like a dropped stone in still water. Some remembered him clearly. The temper. The way he lingered too long at the edge of conversations. Others barely recognized the name. Time erodes suspicion, but it does not erase it. Harold Boone did not join the arrest team. He stayed home, pacing, replaying every step that had led to this morning. He knew an arrest was not a conviction. He knew partial DNA could be attacked in court. Defense attorneys would say contamination, degradation, coincidence. He had seen cases collapse under less. Cutter was extradited within days. Cameras waited outside the Millfield courthouse when the transport van arrived. He stepped out in shackles, blinking against Texas sun, and for a moment the town saw him again as he had been in 1987, local, familiar, almost ordinary. That was the most unsettling part. Monsters here did not wear masks. They bought feed at the same supply store. At arraignment, the prosecutor laid it out in clipped, deliberate phrases. Partial DNA consistent with the defendant. Tire records placing him with a rare model matching impressions at the scene. Witness testimony from the mechanic, Earl Denton, still alive, still certain about the damaged carpet and bumper days after the murder. A pattern of behavior. Opportunity. Proximity. Cutter pleaded not guilty. His defense attorney, sharp-suited and surgical, countered immediately. Consistent with is not identical to. Partial DNA does not eliminate all others. Memories fade. Records get lost. The state had tried and failed to charge this man 20 years ago. Why now? Why after retirement? Why after evidence has aged and witnesses have died? The question lingered. Because technology caught up. Because one detective refused to forget. Because Clara Whitmore never got to turn 18. Pretrial hearings dragged on for months. Forensic experts testified about touch DNA, about epithelial cells trapped beneath broken fingernails. The lab analyst explained statistical probability in careful language. The odds of another unrelated individual matching the partial profile were low, but not impossible. The defense seized on that sliver. Then another crack in the past appeared. A woman named Marlene Sykes came forward after seeing the news. In 1987, she had been 22, living 2 houses down from Raymond Cutter. She told investigators she remembered him coming home late one night that October, agitated, hosing down the bed of his pickup under porch light at nearly 2 in the morning. At the time, she thought nothing of it. Now, with the arrest splashed across television screens, the memory burned sharper. Under oath, she repeated it. The defense suggested imagination shaped by headlines. She did not waver. More whispers surfaced. A former coworker recalled Cutter showing up to a job site days after Clara's murder with scratches on his forearm. He had blamed barbed wire. No one had questioned it then. The prosecution built its timeline carefully. October 9th, 1987. Football game ends around 9:45 p.m. Clara last seen walking toward Maple Street at approximately 10:05. Cutter's alibi? Alone at home. No one to confirm. Mechanic receipt for new tires dated October 14th. Carpet replacement within the same week. Neighbor observing unusual behavior late at night. Partial DNA linking him physically to a struggle. Still, something was missing. A confession. A witness placing him directly with Clara. A full genetic profile. The case balanced on inference and science, old suspicion sharpened by modern tools. Cutter sat through proceedings with an expression carved from stone. Occasionally, he would glance toward the gallery, where Clara's mother now sat older, smaller, but unbroken. She never looked back at him. Her gaze stayed fixed on the prosecution table, as if staring hard enough could bend the past. Millfield split quietly down the middle. Some declared justice finally in motion. Others muttered about doubt, about ruined lives if the state was wrong. The passage of time complicates certainty. Memories blur. People change. But grief does not. As trial approached, another development tightened the noose. Investigators, re-examining old evidence boxes with modern methods, discovered preserved fibers from Clara's jacket had not degraded as badly as once believed. Advanced comparison linked them to a specific automotive carpet manufacturer used in a narrow range of pickup models during the mid-1980s. Raymond Cutter's truck model fell within that range. Not definitive, but narrowing. The defense countered with statistics about how many such trucks were sold statewide. Thousands. Tens of thousands. Reasonable doubt echoed like a drumbeat. Then came the jailhouse informant. A man awaiting sentencing claimed Cutter had spoken loosely during recreation hour, complaining that they never had enough back then and that if they tested that stuff right, I'd have been gone in '87. The statement was explosive and immediately suspect. Informants trade stories for leniency. The prosecution approached cautiously, aware that desperation breeds fabrication. Boone watched from the back of the courtroom during one key hearing, hands folded, heart pounding. He had chased this shadow for 2 decades. Now it stood under fluorescent lights, tangible but fragile. He knew how easily juries fracture under technical arguments. Outside, reporters framed it as a cold case resurrection. Headlines splashed across regional papers. 1987 murder returns to court. Retired detectives' tip revives town's darkest night. The phrase cold case no longer meant forgotten. It meant unfinished. One evening, as trial loomed weeks away, a storm rolled over Millfield. Thunder cracked across open fields, rain hammering tin roofs. In a modest house near Johnson's Creek, Clara's mother sat at her kitchen table with old photographs spread before her. Prom picture. Birthday candles. A life interrupted mid-sentence. She had waited 20 years for this movement. And still, fear gnawed at her. What if it wasn't enough? What if the jury said not proven? Across town, some residents drove past the creek in the rain, headlights slicing through sheets of water, remembering search parties and yellow tape. The land had not changed much. Water still moved slowly between banks. Trees still leaned over dark currents. But the air felt different now, charged. In his cell, Raymond Cutter requested a Bible. Guards noted he slept poorly. He maintained innocence, told anyone who would listen that he was being railroaded by old grudges and new science. Yet when a deputy mentioned Harold Boone's name within earshot, Cutter went silent. The trial date was set for September 2008, 21 years after Clara Whitmore walked down Maple Street and vanished into Texas night. As summer baked the town in relentless heat, anticipation thickened. Justice delayed does not arrive gently. It comes dragging years behind it, years of doubt, rumor, grief. And as jury selection approached, one truth hung over Millfield like the heavy sky before a storm. Whether guilty or not, whether convicted or freed, the verdict would not just judge a man. It would judge the memory of 1987. And in a small Texas town that had tried so hard to move on, the past was about to testify. Jury selection began under a sky bleached white by late summer heat, the courthouse steps radiating warmth like a warning. Inside, the air conditioning hummed, steady and artificial, as if trying to contain the weight of 21 years pressing into polished wooden benches. Potential jurors filed in, teachers, ranch hands, a bank teller, a mechanic too young to remember 1987 except as a story told in lowered voices. Each carried private opinions. Each was asked to set them aside. "Have you heard of the Clara Whitmore case?" the judge asked, again and again. Every hand rose. Memory in Millfield was not abstract. It had a face. 17. Brown hair. Crooked smile. Frozen in time. The defense searched for doubt. The prosecution searched for steadiness. One by one, citizens were dismissed, too connected, too emotional, too certain. In a town this small, neutrality was rare. By the end of the week, 12 jurors and 2 alternates were sworn in, instructed to weigh evidence, not rumor, not history. Opening statements cut through the room like opposing blades. The prosecutor stood first. Calm. Methodical. He told them this was not just a story from 1987. It was a story supported by science that did not exist in 1987. He spoke of Clara's last walk down Maple Street, of tire impressions near Johnson's Creek, of carpet fibers and a rare manufacturing defect. Of a partial DNA profile extracted decades later, consistent with the man sitting at the defense table. He did not shout. He did not dramatize. He let the timeline do the work. Then the defense rose. He paced slowly, deliberate, voice smooth as polished glass. Consistent with, he repeated. Not identical. Not exclusive. Not absolute. He reminded jurors how memory warps over time. How neighbors reconstruct details after watching news reports. How evidence degrades. How desperation to solve a cold case can create tunnel vision. He suggested that Raymond Cutter had been a convenient suspect then and remained convenient now. Raymond Cutter stared straight ahead. The prosecution called its first witnesses, officers from 1987, older now, hair thinner, voices roughened by time. They described the scene at Johnson's Creek, the position of Clara's body, the defensive wounds, the tire tracks pressed into damp soil. Photographs flashed on a screen, black and white images of a night that never fully left this town. Clara's mother left the courtroom during those images. She had seen enough. Earl Denton, the mechanic, took the stand next. He leaned heavily on the rail, voice gravelly but firm. Yes, he remembered Cutter's truck. Yes, he remembered replacing carpet. Yes, he remembered the dented bumper. He could not swear to the exact date without records, but he remembered the feeling. The timing. The unease when news broke about Clara days later. The defense cross-examined hard. Mr. Denton, is it possible your memory has been influenced by the arrest? Possible. Is it possible you worked on dozens of similar trucks that month? Possible. Is it possible you are mistaken? Denton's jaw tightened. Anything's possible, he said. But I know what I remember. Possible. The word lingered like smoke. The forensic analyst followed. Younger. Precise. She explained touch DNA in measured language, describing how skin cells can transfer during struggle. She detailed the extraction process used in 2007, the partial profile recovered from beneath Clara's fingernails. She displayed charts showing allele matches consistent with Raymond Cutter's known DNA profile in Cody's. The jurors leaned forward. Is it a full match? The prosecutor asked. No. Is it consistent? Yes. Could the profile belong to someone else? Statistically unlikely, but not impossible. Again, that narrow opening. Not impossible. The defense rose with a stack of scientific journals. He questioned lab procedures, chain of custody, the storage conditions of evidence collected in 1987 and preserved for 2 decades. Could contamination have occurred? The analyst insisted safeguards were followed. But she admitted older evidence carries inherent challenges. Harold Boone sat rigid in the back row. He had carried that evidence into storage himself. He had signed forms, logged dates, trusted that someday it might speak. Marlene Sykes testified next. She described the night she saw Cutter hosing down his truck. Rain-slick pavement, porch light casting long shadows. The time, around 2 a.m. The defense pressed her. Why hadn't she reported it then? Because she hadn't known Clara was dead yet. Because washing a truck wasn't a crime. Because hindsight is cruel. A murmur rippled through the gallery when she stepped down. Then the prosecution introduced something unexpected. A forensic tire expert had reanalyzed photographs of the impressions from Johnson's Creek using digital enhancement unavailable in 1987. He identified a distinctive wear pattern consistent with the discontinued all-terrain model Boone had rediscovered years later. He explained the manufacturing flaw, outer ridge degradation leading to asymmetrical grooves. How many such tires were sold in Texas? The defense demanded. Thousands. How many would display identical wear patterns? The expert hesitated. Far fewer. The courtroom air felt thinner. Midway through the trial, tension snapped tight when the jailhouse informant was called. He testified that Cutter had made incriminating remarks while awaiting trial, that he'd suggested law enforcement never had enough proof back then, that he thought the case was dead. The defense attacked mercilessly, exposed the informant's pending sentencing, his hopes for leniency. his criminal history. By the time he stepped down, doubt trailed him like a shadow. Outside the courthouse, news vans idled. Reporters spoke into cameras about a cold case reborn, about science colliding with memory. Millfield residents avoided eye contact in diners, conversations clipped and cautious. Old friendships strained under disagreement. One afternoon, the prosecution played an audio clip recorded during Cutter's 1988 questioning. His younger voice filled the courtroom, defensive, slightly amused. "You're chasing ghosts," he had told detectives. "You don't have anything." Now, decades later, that statement echoed differently. The defense objected repeatedly. The judge sustained some, overruled others. Each ruling felt like a tremor. As the state neared its conclusion, they called Harold Boone. He walked to the stand slowly, oath administered, eyes steady. He spoke not as a retired man chasing old demons, but as an investigator recounting facts. He described the original crime scene, his suspicion of someone local, the receipt for tire replacements, the rediscovery of the manufacturing defect, the decision to resubmit evidence in 2007. "Why reopen it?" the prosecutor asked. Boone paused. "Because it was never closed." Silence settled heavy across the room. On cross-examination, the defense suggested obsession. That Boone had locked onto Cutter in 1987 and never let go. That confirmation bias colored every rediscovered clue. Boone did not flinch. "I followed the evidence," he said, then and now. When he stepped down, the gallery exhaled as one. The defense began presenting its case the next morning. Character witnesses described Cutter as quiet, hardworking. A former employer testified he had never seen violence in him. An expert witness challenged the statistical weight of partial DNA, spoke of laboratory fallibility, of the dangers of retrofitting modern science onto degraded samples. The jury listened, took notes. Faces unreadable, days blurred, arguments layered upon arguments. Each side constructing a version of 1987 that either pointed directly at the defendant or dissolved into uncertainty. By the time closing arguments approached, exhaustion hung over the courthouse like thick humidity. 21 years had led to this narrow corridor of deliberation. On the final afternoon, as sunlight slanted through high windows, Clara's mother returned to her seat in the front row. She folded her hands tightly in her lap. Across the aisle, Raymond Cutter adjusted his tie, eyes fixed on nothing. The prosecutor stood for his closing. He walked jurors back through Maple Street, through Johnson's Creek, through fibers and tire grooves and DNA beneath broken nails. He spoke of probability, of convergence, of the unlikelihood that all these threads pointed anywhere but to the man before them. The defense followed, voice low but urgent. He reminded them of the burden of proof. Beyond a reasonable doubt. Not suspicion. Not probability. Certainty. He warned them against the emotional pull of a long unsolved tragedy, against convicting a man to satisfy history. When both sides sat down, the judge instructed the jury carefully. The law, the standards, the weight of their task. Then the jurors rose and disappeared into deliberation. Millfield held its breath. In the quiet that followed, the past and present stood face to face, waiting to see which one would prevail. The jury room door closed with a soft, final click that sounded louder than any gavel. 12 ordinary citizens sat around a long oak table, legal pads open, evidence binders stacked in uneven towers. Outside, the courthouse corridor felt suspended in time. No one spoke above a whisper. Even the vending machine hum seemed intrusive. Inside that room, 1987 was no longer memory. It was argument. The foreperson, a middle-aged school principal, suggested they begin with the DNA. It was the spine of the prosecution's case. Partial profile. Consistent alleles. Statistically unlikely to belong to someone else, but not impossible. The words circled the table again, stripped now of courtroom theatrics. One juror, a rancher with sun-split knuckles, tapped his pen against the page. "Consistent isn't conclusive," he said. A nurse countered quietly. But it's not just DNA. It's everything together. Everything together. That was the state's strategy. Not one smoking gun, but convergence. Tire wear pattern. Replacement receipt dated days after the murder. Neighbor washing down a truck at 2 a.m. Scratches on forearms. No alibi. They moved to the tire evidence. Photographs were passed around. Enhanced digital overlays showing the asymmetrical groove. The expert's testimony replayed in memory. Thousands of tires sold. Far fewer with that distinctive defect. One juror questioned how many of those thousands were in Millfield in 1987. Another pointed out that only one suspect had both that tire model and a suspicious timeline. They debated the mechanic's memory. 21 years is a long time. Could he be wrong? Could news coverage have reshaped recollection? The rancher remained skeptical. The nurse leaned forward. He didn't gain anything from testifying. The jailhouse informant was dismissed quickly. Too compromised. Too hungry for a deal. Then they examined Boone's testimony. Some saw obsession. Others saw persistence. The foreperson read from notes. Followed the evidence. Then and now. It sounded steady on paper. Not emotional. Not vindictive. Steady. Outside the jury room, tension stretched thin. Clara's mother sat unmoving, eyes fixed on the closed door at the end of the hallway. Her husband had passed away 5 years earlier, never seeing this day. She carried his absence like an extra weight on her shoulders. Across the corridor, Raymond Cutter sat beside his attorney, hands folded, jaw clenched. He had aged visibly during the trial. Dark circles under his eyes. Skin drawn tight. When a reporter's camera clicked too loudly, he flinched. Harold Boone stood by a window overlooking the town square. Cars passed. Life continued. He wondered how many times he had imagined this moment, and how many versions ended differently. Hours passed. Inside, jurors revisited the timeline minute by minute. Football game ends. Clara walks alone. Cutter unaccounted for. Body discovered. Tire replacement 3 days later. Carpet replaced. Neighbor sees late night washdown. One juror raised a quiet but sharp question. If he did it, why keep living here? Why not leave immediately? Another answered just as quietly. Because no one charged him. Silence followed. They requested the DNA expert's testimony transcript. Read it line by line. Statistical probability. Laboratory controls. Chain of custody. The defense's cross-examination. The small cracks. The small uncertainties. Reasonable doubt. The phrase hung in the air like humidity before a storm. By early evening, they took an initial vote. Not unanimous. 8 for guilty. 4 uncertain. No one said not guilty. But uncertainty can be just as powerful. They broke for dinner, box sandwiches delivered under watchful eyes. Conversations softened, less formal now. The rancher admitted the fibers troubled him. The nurse admitted the partial DNA made her uneasy. They were not arguing innocence. They were measuring certainty. As darkness fell over Millfield, courthouse lights glowed against the square. Reporters speculated live on regional broadcasts. Cold case verdict imminent, one anchor said, voice charged. In the jury room, they returned to Boone. One juror asked a question that shifted the tone. If this was your daughter, she said slowly, would this be enough? The room stiffened. Emotional appeals were dangerous, but the question lingered. The foreperson redirected. Not what we feel, what we know. What they knew. Clara fought. Clara scratched. Under her nails, decades later, cells consistent with Raymond Cutter. Cutter replaced tires and carpet days after her death. Cutter had no alibi. Cutter was seen washing down his truck in the early hours. What they did not know, exactly how it happened. Whether any other person in Millfield could share that partial profile. Whether time had distorted memory. Near midnight, they voted again. 10 for guilty. 2 uncertain. The holdouts were not defiant, just cautious. One was the rancher. The other, a young accountant who had been 5 years old in 1987 and carried no emotional memory of the case. He focused on numbers, on percentages, on the margin between unlikely and impossible. They reviewed the tire evidence again, the expert's explanation of where patterns narrowing the field. They discussed the statistical improbability of both the tire defect and the DNA pointing to the same man by coincidence. Coincidence. How many coincidences does it take before it stops being coincidence? At 2:17 a.m., after hours of measured debate, the accountant leaned back in his chair and closed his eyes briefly. "I don't like it," he said, "but I don't see another explanation that fits all of it." The rancher nodded slowly. "Me neither." They took a final vote. Unanimous.
Guilty.
The foreperson pressed the buzzer. In the hallway, Clara's mother stood abruptly as the bailiff stepped out. "We have a verdict." The courtroom filled within minutes, the air thick, electric. Cutter was led in, shackles faintly clinking. He scanned the jury box, searching for something: hesitation, mercy, doubt. He found none. On the charge of capital murder, the clerk read, voice steady, "How do you find?" The foreperson rose. "Guilty." A sound escaped Clara's mother. Not quite a sob, not quite a gasp. Something deeper. Something pulled from 21 years of suspended breath. Cutter's face drained of color. He shook his head once, barely perceptible. His attorney placed a hand on his arm. The judge thanked the jury for their service. Sentencing would follow. In Texas, capital murder carried weight, life imprisonment, possibly more. But in that moment, punishment felt secondary. The verdict itself was the earthquake. Outside, word spread in seconds. Phones lit up across Millfield. Porch lights flicked on. Some residents wept quietly. Others sat stunned, unsure whether relief or sorrow dominated. Harold Boone remained seated long after the courtroom emptied. He stared at the empty witness stand, at the place where Clara's name had been spoken so many times in the past weeks. He had imagined triumph. Instead, he felt something quieter. Not victory. Not closure. Just stillness. Justice delayed is not clean. It does not rewind the clock or restore what was taken. It acknowledges. It marks. It says the past mattered. As dawn approached again over Millfield, nearly 21 years to the day after Clara Whitmore's last walk down Maple Street, the town felt different. The cold case that had lingered like a ghost was now a conviction etched into record. And yet, beneath the relief, beneath the headlines and the murmured prayers, one truth remained unshaken. No verdict could return a 17-year-old girl to the porch light she never reached. The creek still moved slowly beyond town limits. The trees still leaned over dark water. But the silence there no longer held only questions. It held an answer. Sentencing came weeks later, but in Millfield the verdict had already rewritten history. The word guilty moved through church pews, barbershops, and school hallways like a current, steady, undeniable. Yet beneath the surface of relief, something unsettled lingered. Because when a cold case finally breaks, it doesn't end the story. It exposes everything that survived in the dark. Raymond Cutter stood for sentencing in a pressed prison uniform, shoulders squared as if posture alone could resist gravity. The courtroom felt less crowded this time. The spectacle had faded. What remained was consequence. The prosecution asked for life without parole. They spoke of brutality, of a 17-year-old girl whose future had been extinguished on a dirt shoulder, of decades stolen from a family waiting for accountability. They described the violence again, not in graphic detail, but enough to remind the court what had happened beside Johnson's Creek. The defense asked for mercy. They spoke of age, of the absence of prior violent convictions, of lingering doubts in a case built on partial DNA and reconstructed memory. They did not re-argue innocence outright, but they circled it carefully, suggesting the possibility of imperfection in a system reaching back 21 years. Clara's mother rose to speak. Her voice trembled at first, then steadied. She did not address Cutter directly. She spoke to the court, to the town, to the empty space her daughter should have occupied. She described Clara's laugh, her plans to study literature, the college brochures still stored in a cedar chest. She described setting an extra place at the table the first Thanksgiving after the murder because grief had not yet accepted reality. "I waited half my life for this day," she said quietly. "Not for revenge. For truth." Cutter stared at the floor. When the judge delivered the sentence, life imprisonment without possibility of parole, the words landed heavy but unsurprising. Shackles clicked again. This time they did not carry uncertainty. They carried finality. Outside, cameras flashed once more. Reporters asked Harold Boone how it felt to see the case closed. He paused before answering. "It was never about me," he said. "It was about her." But closure is not a switch. It does not turn off the past. In the weeks that followed, Millfield adjusted to a new version of itself. The cold case that had defined a generation now had an ending, at least on paper. The high school students who had once whispered about Clara in locker rooms now told their own children about the night everything changed, and the morning justice finally arrived. Yet not everyone felt settled. There were those who questioned quietly whether partial DNA should carry such weight, who wondered if 21 years had shaped the narrative too neatly around a single suspect. They did not protest publicly. They did not write letters. But doubt, once introduced, rarely disappears entirely. Harold Boone returned to his routines, morning coffee on the porch, evening walks past oak trees that had grown taller since 1987. He no longer kept the case file on his kitchen table. It was boxed, labeled, archived properly. And yet, some nights, he replayed it. The shoe in the creek. The broken fingernails. The receipt dated October 14th. The tire defect rediscovered by accident in a garage thick with dust. He knew how fragile the chain had been. One missing record. One degraded sample. One juror unconvinced. And the outcome could have shifted. Justice often balances on details so small they feel invisible. Clara's mother visited Johnson's Creek one final time that autumn. She stood where volunteers had once searched with trembling hands. The water moved lazily, indifferent to history. She did not cry. She simply stood, breathing in air that felt lighter than it had in decades. Across state lines, in a concrete cell, Raymond Cutter began serving the sentence that would likely end his life behind bars. Appeals were filed, as expected. His attorney challenged the admissibility of partial DNA, questioned the reliability of enhanced tire analysis. The machinery of post-conviction review turned slowly, methodically, but the verdict held. Years later, law students would study the case as an example of cold case prosecution in the era of advancing forensic science. They would debate the thresholds of probability, the ethics of delayed justice, the tension between memory and evidence. For Millfield, it was less theoretical. It was the night parents began insisting their children never walk alone, even in small towns. It was the reason porch lights stayed on a little longer. It was the shadow that lingered over Friday night football games for a generation. And then, gradually, it became something else, a marker of resilience. Because the story did not end in 1987. It did not end in 2007 when a retired detective reopened a file. It did not even end with a guilty verdict. It continued in every decision to keep searching, to keep preserving evidence, to trust that time does not erase truth. It tests it. The phrase cold case suggests stillness, dust, forgotten boxes. But Clara Whitmore's case proved something different. It proved that silence is not surrender, that answers can wait decades in sealed envelopes and aging memory, patient as stone. On the 20th anniversary of the verdict, a small plaque was placed near Johnson's Creek. Not at the exact site. Her family did not want that, but close enough to acknowledge what had happened without defining the land by it. It bore Clara's name, her birth year, her death year, and a single line: remembered, never abandoned. Harold Boone attended the quiet dedication. His hair now fully white, posture slightly bent. He watched as Clara's mother, older still, traced her fingers over the engraved letters. There were no reporters this time. No flashing lights. Just wind moving through grass. When the ceremony ended, Boone lingered alone. He thought about how easily the case could have remained unsolved. How many files across the country sit unopened, waiting for technology, for persistence, for chance? He thought about the thin line between forgotten and found. The town square behind him buzzed with ordinary life. Children riding bikes, a delivery truck idling, someone laughing outside the diner. The world had moved forward. It always does. But beneath that movement lay a quiet certainty. The past may fade, but it does not disappear. It waits. And sometimes, after decades of silence, it speaks again, through fibers, through fingerprints, through the stubborn memory of a detective who refused to let a 17-year-old girl become just another unsolved headline. The creek kept flowing. The town kept breathing. And the cold case that once haunted Millfield no longer whispered unanswered questions into the Texas. Winter came hard the year after the sentencing, a blue norther sweeping across Millfield and rattling window panes that had once trembled under very different tension. The headlines had faded. The satellite trucks were gone. But something about the conviction refused to settle cleanly into the past. Because when a cold case is cracked after decades, it doesn't just close a wound. It reopens the timeline, forces people to re-examine who they were, what they saw, what they missed. And in early January, the first crack in the certainty appeared. A regional investigative podcast aired an episode questioning the forensic integrity of aging DNA samples. Clara Whitmore's case was not named directly, but the parallels were obvious. Partial profiles, long-term storage, small-town prosecutions leaning heavily on modern technology applied to old evidence. Within days, social media threads began dissecting the trial. Amateur analysts debated allele frequency statistics. Armchair skeptics pulled archived court transcripts and highlighted phrases like statistically unlikely and not impossible. Millfield noticed. At the diner on Main Street, conversations shifted tone. Not accusations. Not yet. But the word doubt resurfaced, quieter this time, sharper. Harold Boone heard about the podcast from his neighbor. He didn't listen to it at first. He didn't need to. He knew every inch of that case file, every signature, every chain of custody form. But that night, curiosity overpowered pride. He sat at his kitchen table, pressed play, and let a stranger's voice narrate fragments of the worst night of his career. The host questioned whether partial DNA, without a full profile, should anchor a capital conviction. Raised the possibility of secondary transfer. Wondered aloud whether confirmation bias might have influenced reanalysis once Cutter became the renewed suspect. Boone turned it off halfway through. Across state lines, Cutter's appellate attorney seized the moment. A motion was filed requesting independent retesting of the remaining biological evidence using even newer probabilistic genotyping software, technology more advanced than what had been available in 2008. The argument was precise. If science had evolved once to reopen the case, it could evolve again to reassess it. The court granted limited review. And just like that, a case that had seemed sealed began to breathe again. Clara's mother received the notice by certified mail. The envelope felt heavier than it should have. She had learned over decades that justice is not a straight line. It loops. It hesitates. It forces you to relive what you thought you had survived. The evidence, carefully preserved since 1987, was transferred under strict supervision to an independent forensic laboratory. Cameras recorded every movement. Gloves changed. Instruments sterilized. No one wanted a procedural shadow to cloud what had already been so hard-won. The town waited again. This time, the waiting felt different. In 2008, anticipation had been sharp, electric. Now it was quieter, edged with fatigue. People had moved on with their lives. Children born after the murder were now adults. The idea that everything might be questioned again felt exhausting. Boone followed the developments from a distance. He was no longer an official part of the process. Just a retired detective watching the machinery he once operated grind forward without him. He told himself the truth would hold. That science would confirm what it had already suggested. But certainty is a fragile thing. Months passed before the lab completed its review. The findings were technical, dense with statistical modeling and likelihood ratios. The new analysis did not exclude Raymond Cutter. In fact, it strengthened the probability that the partial profile was consistent with him rather than a random, unrelated individual. The likelihood ratio increased. The margin tightened. But again, no absolute. The appellate court reviewed the report carefully. Defense experts argued that even probabilistic genotyping relies on assumptions embedded in software algorithms. Prosecution experts countered that the updated analysis reinforced the original conclusion. In the end, the conviction stood. For Clara's mother, the confirmation brought relief, but not celebration. Relief is quieter. It feels like steady ground beneath your feet after months of uncertainty. For Cutter, it meant another door closed. Yet the renewed scrutiny had an unintended consequence. It reopened broader conversations across Texas about cold case prosecutions. Law schools invited forensic analysts to debate evolving standards. District attorneys reviewed other decades-old convictions built on partial or newly enhanced evidence. The Whitmore case became a reference point, not for scandal, but for complexity. Millfield found itself part of a larger narrative about science and justice intersecting over time. One evening, nearly 2 years after sentencing, Boone received a letter. It came from a young woman studying criminal justice at a university in Austin. She wrote that she had grown up hearing about Clara Whitmore, that she chose her field of study because she believed in persistence. She thanked him for not letting the case fade. Boone read the letter twice. He realized then that the case had become something more than tragedy. It had become instruction. Proof that evidence, even when dormant, can speak decades later if someone listens closely enough. But memory remains complicated. On the 25th anniversary of Clara's death, a candlelight vigil was held at the high school stadium. Not somber, reflective. Students who had never known her listened, as alumni described 1987. The fear. The curfews. The way trust shifted overnight. Clara's mother spoke briefly. She did not mention Cutter. She did not mention appeals. She spoke about safety, about community, about looking out for one another in ways that feel small but matter. As candles flickered against the Texas night, Boone stood at the edge of the field. He thought about how the case had followed him through retirement, through doubt, through vindication. He thought about the fragile intersection of science and human judgment, how both evolve, how neither is perfect. The phrase cold case once meant abandonment. Now, in Millfield, it meant endurance. Years earlier, a partial DNA profile pulled from beneath broken fingernails had cracked open a silence that stretched across decades. It had survived scrutiny, challenge, reanalysis. Not flawless, not absolute, but resilient. The creek still flowed beyond town limits. The plaque near its bank weathered sun and rain, letters fading slightly with time. But the story etched into Millfield's history no longer trembled under uncertainty. It stood tested. And in a small Texas town that once believed violent crime only happened somewhere else, the legacy of 1987 remained not just as a wound, but as a reminder that truth can be delayed, debated, even doubted, yet still endure under the weight of years. The night air cooled. Candles dimmed one by one. And Millfield, older now, carried its history forward, not as a whisper of an unsolved mystery, but as a testament to how long the past can echo before it finally answers back. Time did what time always does. It layered new routines over old scars. It paved roads that were once gravel. It replaced storefronts that had witnessed candlelight vigils and whispered suspicions. But beneath the steady rhythm of ordinary life in Millfield, 1987 never fully loosened its grip. Because even after conviction, even after appeals failed and science reaffirmed its conclusions, the story refused to shrink into a footnote. It lived in caution. Parents who had once been teenagers during Clara Whitmore's final walk now enforced curfews with a firmness shaped by memory. Porch lights stayed on long after midnight. Teenagers rolled their eyes at warnings, unaware that those warnings were forged beside Johnson's Creek. And then, nearly 3 decades after the murder, something unexpected surfaced. A box. It was discovered during the demolition of an old storage shed behind what used to be Earl Denton's mechanic shop. Denton himself had passed away 2 years earlier. The property was being cleared for redevelopment when a construction worker pried open a warped wooden crate tucked beneath collapsed shelving. Inside were old receipts, rusted tools, oil-stained rags, and a sealed envelope labeled in faded ink, October 87, Cutter. The worker, curious but unsure, handed it over to the site manager. Within days, it reached the Millfield Police Department. The envelope contained carbon copies of handwritten service notes, more detailed than the receipt presented at trial. One note mentioned not only tire replacement and carpet removal, but also front grille alignment and inspection for undercarriage damage. The date was October 13, 1987. 4 days after Clara's murder. The discovery did not overturn anything. It did not introduce a new suspect. It did not expose corruption, but it sharpened the timeline. The prosecution had argued that Cutter replaced tires and carpet days after the crime. Now there was documentation suggesting he brought the truck in specifically to assess undercarriage damage consistent with rough terrain, possibly creek banks. Millfield reacted with a mixture of validation and unease. Validation because the evidence reinforced the narrative jurors had accepted. Unease because it underscored how close details can sit, hidden in dust for decades. Harold Boone was informed by a former colleague who still respected the retired detective enough to make the call personally. Boone listened quietly. He did not express triumph. Instead, he felt a familiar chill, the same one he'd felt the first time he saw Clara's shoe in the creek. So close, he thought. That envelope had sat less than a mile from the courthouse, where Cutter was once questioned and released. It had survived heat, floods, rodents. It had nearly been thrown away. Justice is sometimes one cardboard box away from oblivion. The district attorney's office reviewed the contents. Though the conviction stood firm, the additional documentation was entered into record, strengthening the case history against any future appeals. Cutter's appellate counsel was notified. No new motions followed. But the psychological effect on Millfield was immediate. The town had spent years debating probability and partial profiles. Now there was something tangible. A piece of paper. A date. A mechanic's scribbled shorthand hinting at more than routine maintenance. Conversations at the diner shifted again, this time not toward doubt, but toward a strange sense of inevitability. As if the case, even decades later, continued to assemble itself more completely. Boone visited the old Denton property one afternoon. Demolition equipment idled nearby. The shed was gone, replaced by leveled earth. He stood where it had once leaned crookedly against Texas wind and imagined that envelope sitting untouched while arguments unfolded in courtrooms and appeals panels. He felt no anger, only perspective. Back in 1987, the investigation had been limited by what they could test, what they could process, what they could see. Evidence wasn't missing, it was dormant, waiting for the right pair of hands, the right moment, the right question. The phrase cold case implies stagnation. But Clara Whitmore's case had never been stagnant. It had been suspended, preserved in layers of paper, tape, and memory. As the years rolled forward, Millfield High School introduced a new elective course on forensic science. Enrollment filled immediately. Students studied fingerprinting techniques, fiber analysis, DNA extraction principles. Clara's name was never exploited, never sensationalized, but her story lingered in the subtext of every lesson. Science moves forward. So does accountability. Meanwhile, in a correctional facility hours away, Raymond Cutter aged behind concrete walls. Appeals exhausted. Public attention faded. The world that had once speculated about partial alleles and tire grooves moved on to newer headlines. But the sentence remained. Occasionally, true crime forums would resurrect the case. Debates flared. Some insisted the evidence was overwhelming. Others clung to the idea that absence of absolute certainty leaves room for error. The internet thrives on ambiguity. Millfield did not. For those who had lived through 1987, the combination of science, circumstance, and now rediscovered documentation formed a mosaic too specific to ignore. It was not built on a single strand. It was built on convergence. One autumn evening, Clara's mother attended a small community forum at the library discussing advancements in cold case investigations statewide. She listened as experts described new techniques, genetic genealogy, familial database searches, digital reconstruction. When asked to speak, she offered a simple reflection. Technology changes, she said, but what matters most is that someone cares enough to keep looking. The room fell quiet. Harold Boone, seated in the back, felt the weight of those words. Caring had kept a file from being archived permanently. Caring had turned a garage discovery into a breakthrough. Caring had carried a town through decades of uncertainty. Later that night, Boone walked past Johnson's Creek once more. The water was lower than usual, rocks exposed along the bank. He could almost trace the outline of where Clara had been found. Memory does not fade evenly. Some details remained sharp as glass. He realized something then. The case had changed Millfield, but it had changed him more. It had taught him that justice is rarely dramatic in real time. It is methodical, frustrating, dependent on patience, dependent on preservation, dependent on refusing to let a name slip into abstraction. The wind rustled dry leaves along the creek bed. In the distance, the hum of highway traffic reminded him that the world beyond Millfield never paused for one town's tragedy. But here, in this place, the past had not been allowed to disappear. A box in a forgotten shed had spoken. Science had evolved. Jurors had weighed uncertainty against convergence. And a 17-year-old girl whose life ended on a dark stretch of Maple Street had not been reduced to a rumor. The cold case that once shocked a small Texas town had done more than deliver a verdict. It had revealed how thin the line is between lost and found, between forgotten and preserved. And as night settled again over Millfield, steady and familiar, the town carried its history not as an open wound, but as a hard-earned reminder that even after decades, truth can still emerge from dust. 30 years is a long time for a story to live in a town the size of Millfield. Long enough for storefronts to change names twice. Long enough for oak trees to outgrow the height of the courthouse. Long enough for children born the year Clara Whitmore died to start families of their own. And yet, some nights, when the wind moves just right across Johnson's Creek, the past feels closer than the present. It was during one of those nights that another letter arrived. Not to the police department. Not to the district attorney. To Harold Boone. No return address. Postmarked from within Texas. The handwriting uneven, deliberate, like someone trying to disguise familiarity. Boone opened it at his kitchen table under the same yellow light that had once illuminated tire photographs and aging evidence logs. The letter was short. You got the right man. But not for the reason you think. No signature. Boone read it twice. Then a third time. The sentence was maddening in its precision. Not a denial. Not a confession. A fracture. He reported it immediately. The envelope was processed. No usable fingerprints. No viable DNA. The paper common, commercially available. Postmark traced to a regional distribution center. No surveillance footage retained. The department treated it as a potential hoax. Cold cases that gain notoriety often attract ghosts, people seeking attention, inserting themselves into narratives that do not belong to them. But Boone could not shake the phrasing. You got the right man. But not for the reason you think. Reason. The trial had hinged on convergence, DNA, tires, timeline. But motive had always been thinner. The prosecution suggested opportunistic violence. A man driving alone. A vulnerable girl walking home. An impulsive act escalating into brutality. It fit the evidence. It satisfied the legal threshold. But what if there was more? Boone requested access to archived interview transcripts from 1987 that he had not revisited in years. He read through statements from classmates, teachers, neighbors. Most were routine. Alibis. Observations. Fragments of small-town life. Then he reached an interview with a name that had barely surfaced during trial, Daniel Whitmore. Clara's cousin. 18 in 1987. Lived 2 counties over but had attended the same football game the night she vanished. His statement at the time had been brief. He left early, claimed he felt sick, drove home alone. No one had challenged it. Family was rarely scrutinized aggressively in the early days. Focus had shifted quickly to local adult males with proximity. Boone felt a flicker of unease. Daniel had not been called as a witness in 2008. He had not been relevant to the DNA, not connected to the truck, not seen near Johnson's Creek. His name was a footnote. Still, Boone made a call. Daniel Whitmore, now in his late 40s, worked as a regional sales manager in San Antonio. Married. 2 children. No criminal record. When contacted, he agreed to speak voluntarily. He sounded surprised, then irritated. "That case is over," he said. "You convicted the guy." Boone met him at a neutral location, a small conference room at a state office building. Not an interrogation. A conversation. Daniel appeared polished, confident. But when Boone mentioned the letter, something in his posture shifted. Barely perceptible, but there. "You think I sent that?" Daniel asked, incredulous. "I don't know who sent it," Boone replied evenly. "I just know it reopened questions." Daniel leaned back, arms crossed. Cutter killed her. The jury decided. Boone watched his eyes. "Where did you go after the game that night?" The answer came quickly. "Home. Like I told you in '87. Anyone see you?" A pause. "No." The room tightened. There was no direct evidence tying Daniel to the crime. None. But Boone had learned over decades that unresolved corners sometimes hide in plain sight. He requested, with appropriate legal channels, a voluntary DNA sample from Daniel to compare against the partial profile once more, not because the lab had excluded others conclusively, but because probabilistic modeling leaves theoretical space. Daniel hesitated before agreeing. "If it puts this to bed," he said. The sample was processed. Millfield did not know about the renewed inquiry. The department kept it quiet, unwilling to ignite speculation without cause. Clara's mother was informed privately. She listened in silence. The idea of re-examining family felt invasive, painful, but she did not object. Weeks passed. The results came back definitive. Daniel Whitmore was excluded. His DNA did not align with the partial profile. The probabilistic analysis reaffirmed Cutter's consistency and ruled Daniel out within measurable certainty. Boone felt 2 things at once: relief and frustration. The letter remained unsolved. Handwriting experts could not match it to known samples. Linguistic analysis suggested someone familiar with the case details, but not necessarily inside law enforcement. It might have been a provocateur, a conspiracy theorist, or someone carrying private guilt unrelated to the crime itself. The phrase lingered. "Not for the reason you think." Boone revisited the original autopsy findings again. Clara had defensive wounds. She fought. The injuries suggested rage, but also panic. There had never been signs of prolonged captivity. It was swift, violent, chaotic. Motive in crimes like this is often tragically simple. Opportunity colliding with impulse. But human minds resist simplicity. We search for deeper narratives, hidden connections. As months slipped by, the letter's impact began to fade publicly, though internally, it never fully dissolved. Boone filed it under unresolved correspondence, aware that some mysteries attached themselves to solved cases like shadows. Meanwhile, Millfield continued forward. A new police chief took office, younger, trained in digital forensics. He cited the Whitmore case in his swearing-in speech as a reminder that evidence must be preserved meticulously. That time is no longer an enemy to justice, it is a collaborator. Clara's plaque by the creek weathered another summer. Grass grew taller around its base. Occasionally, fresh flowers appeared without note. And somewhere, the author of that letter remained silent. Perhaps satisfied. Perhaps disappointed that their words did not fracture the conviction. Perhaps relieved that the renewed scrutiny only strengthened it. One evening, Boone sat alone again at his kitchen table, the letter unfolded before him. He considered the possibility that the sentence was not meant to undermine the verdict, but to provoke reflection. Maybe the reason was not legal. Maybe it was human. Maybe the writer believed Cutter killed Clara not in a random act, but in something more personal, an encounter unspoken, a conflict buried. Something no forensic report could capture. But speculation without evidence is noise. The facts remained: partial DNA consistent with Cutter, tire defect aligning with impressions at the scene, service records documenting vehicle repairs days after the murder, behavioral anomalies, no alibi, convergence. Boone folded the letter carefully and returned it to its envelope. Cold cases, even when cracked, rarely dissolve completely. They leave residue, questions that no courtroom can fully extinguish. Motive may never be articulated. Thoughts in a killer's mind may never be known. What endures are the measurable truths, the fibers, the dates, the probabilities weighed by 12 citizens in a room thick with responsibility. Outside, the Texas night stretched wide and quiet over Millfield. The creek flowed steadily in the dark, indifferent to anonymous letters and lingering speculation. The town had faced doubt again and held. And though a single sentence written in uneven ink tried to fracture certainty, it only revealed something stronger beneath it. A case tested by time, challenged by evolving science, scrutinized from every angle, and still standing. The past had been questioned. It had answered. And in the silence that followed, Millfield understood that even when echoes persist, some truths no longer tremble. The letter should have been the last ripple. It wasn't. 2 years after it arrived, when most people in Millfield had folded it into the category of unresolved curiosities, a documentary crew rolled into town. Not a loud, sensational network special, something quieter, streaming platform polished, marketed as a deep dive into cold case convictions shaped by evolving forensic science. They wanted nuance. They wanted tension. They wanted Clara Whitmore. The town council debated for weeks whether to cooperate. Some argued that the story had already taken enough from Millfield. Others believed transparency was protection, that if you had nothing to hide, you didn't hide. In the end, access was granted. Limited. Controlled. Cameras filmed Maple Street at dusk, golden light stretching long shadows across sidewalks that once held search parties. They filmed Johnson's Creek, slow and reflective, water barely rippling under cypress branches. They filmed the courthouse steps where Raymond Cutter had heard the word guilty. But what gave the documentary its pulse wasn't scenery. It was Cutter himself. From prison, he agreed to an interview. The footage aired months later. Millfield gathered in living rooms to watch, curiosity stronger than resistance. Cutter looked older than most remembered. Hair nearly gone, face lined. But his eyes, sharp, calculating, had not dulled. He maintained his innocence. Calmly, methodically. He did not attack Clara. He did not attack her family. He attacked the process. Partial DNA. Confirmation bias. A retired detective who needed to be right. A town that wanted closure more than certainty. Then the interviewer asked about the mechanics records found years later in the Denton shed. Cutter paused. Not long. Just long enough. I fix my truck, he said. That's not a crime. The interviewer pressed further. Why replace tires days after the murder? Because they were worn. The answer felt rehearsed. Then came the line that unsettled viewers across Millfield. I didn't kill Clara Whitmore, Cutter said evenly. But I knew they'd pin it on me one day. Knew. The word echoed. Online forums exploded after the episode aired. Some viewers found his composure convincing. Others saw manipulation. Former jurors were contacted for comment. Most declined. One agreed anonymously, stating, "Confidence isn't innocence." The documentary also revisited the anonymous letter. Experts speculated about its psychological intent. Some suggested it was written by someone who believed Cutter was guilty, but disagreed with the prosecution's narrative. Others theorized it could have been authored by Cutter himself, through indirect means, to seed ambiguity. Prison mail logs were reviewed. No direct evidence connected him to the letter. Still, doubt has a way of resurfacing when given a spotlight. Millfield felt it again, not as sharp as before, but present. Clara's mother refused to participate in the documentary. She issued a brief statement instead. The verdict was reached in a court of law. We have lived this story longer than anyone watching it on a screen. Harold Boone did agree to be interviewed. He sat in his modest living room, hands folded, and answered questions without defensiveness. He explained the timeline, the evidence, the years of waiting. When asked whether he had ever doubted the conviction, he did not hesitate. "No," he said. "I've questioned details. I've re-examined assumptions. But doubt and scrutiny are part of justice. They don't undo it." The documentary's final episode ended not with a definitive answer, but with ambiguity, montage shots of the creek, the plaque, Cutter's prison yard silhouette, Boone walking past the courthouse. Ambiguity sells. Certainty rarely does. In the months following its release, letters arrived at the police department from strangers across the country. Some offered support. Some offered alternative theories, transient suspects, secret relationships, shadow conspiracies with no grounding in evidence. Cold cases attract projection. People insert mystery where complexity already exists. The department reviewed each tip. None produced new leads. But something else happened, quieter, more significant. A young forensic analyst from Dallas contacted the Millfield PD with a proposal. She had been researching advancements in environmental trace analysis, microscopic sediment comparison using isotope profiling. In theory, soil particles embedded in vehicle undercarriages could be matched to specific geographic regions with remarkable precision, even decades later, if preserved properly. Johnson's Creek had a unique mineral signature due to underlying limestone formations. The original evidence logs indicated that trace soil samples had been collected from Clara's clothing and from Cutter's truck tires in 1987, but the technology to compare them at that level did not exist then. The samples were still archived. The chief authorized exploratory testing. This time, there were no cameras. No headlines. Just lab coats and microscopes and data models. The analysis took months. When the report returned, it added another layer, not revolutionary but reinforcing. The mineral composition of soil recovered from Cutter's archived tire sample was highly consistent with sediment from the Johnson's Creek bank. Not generic Texas soil. Not roadside gravel. Specific. Defense experts would argue that Cutter lived nearby and could have driven past the creek countless times. That soil transfer proves presence, not murder. But presence matters. Especially when layered atop DNA consistency, tire defect alignment, service records, behavioral anomalies. Convergence again. Millfield did not celebrate this addition. It did not need to. The convictions stood firm without it. But internally, among those who had carried the case across decades, the new data felt like another brick sealing the foundation. Harold Boone received a copy of the summary report by courtesy. He read it slowly. He thought about how science keeps moving long after trials end. How evidence once considered thin can thicken over time, not by changing, but by being understood more fully. He also thought about Cutter's words in the documentary. "I knew they'd pin it on me one day." Was that paranoia? Or awareness? Some people sense suspicion long before charges materialize. Some know their behavior casts shadows. Boone would never know what Cutter truly believed. And perhaps that was the final truth of it. Not every question deserves an answer. Not every shadow hides a secret. Sometimes the accumulation of measurable facts outweighs the lingering noise of speculation. The documentary's buzz faded. Online debates shifted to newer cases. Millfield exhaled again. The creek continued its slow movement through seasons, flooding in spring, shrinking in drought. The plaque weathered, but remained legible. High school students still learned about fiber analysis and DNA extraction in classrooms built years after 1987. And the case, once defined by silence, then by verdict, then by scrutiny, settled into something steadier. Not perfect, not immune to question, but reinforced. The anonymous letter remained unanswered. Filed. Preserved. A single loose thread in an otherwise tightly woven narrative. Yet as years stretched forward, that thread grew thinner, less capable of unraveling what had been tested repeatedly. In a small Texas town once shaken by a girl who never made it home, the cold case had evolved from mystery to conviction to examination, and through it all, it endured. Not because it was simple, but because it survived being questioned. By the time the case entered its fourth decade, it no longer felt like breaking news. It felt like architecture, built into the structure of Millfield itself. The murder of Clara Whitmore had shaped policy, shaped parenting, shaped the way porch lights burned a little longer than necessary. The conviction of Raymond Cutter had shaped trust in forensic science, in patience, in the stubborn refusal to let a cold case fossilize. And yet, history has a way of circling back when you least expect it. It began not with a headline, not with a letter, but with a phone call from a corrections officer 3 hours north of Millfield. Raymond Cutter had collapsed in the prison yard. Cardiac arrest. Resuscitated once. Stabilized. Critical condition. The news reached Millfield quietly. The police chief informed Clara's mother personally. Harold Boone heard it later that afternoon, his expression unreadable as he absorbed the update. Death has a different weight when it involves the convicted. Some felt indifference. Others felt a flicker of something more complicated, because if Cutter died, so would the possibility of ever extracting a confession, a motive, an explanation that might quiet the last restless questions. 2 days later, Cutter regained consciousness. And he asked to speak with a chaplain. Not unusual, not significant on its own. But the chaplain documented something that filtered back to the district attorney's office through formal channels. Cutter had expressed a desire to clear his conscience. Those words ignite attention like gasoline. A recorded meeting was arranged, legally documented, attended by a prison official and later reviewed by prosecutors. No coercion. No promises. Just an opportunity. Cutter looked frail in the footage. Oxygen cannula beneath his nose. Hands thinner, veins pronounced. Age and illness had stripped him of the steady defiance he displayed in courtrooms and documentaries. "I'm not confessing to something I didn't do," he began. The room seemed to exhale prematurely. Then he continued. "But I wasn't as innocent as I let them think." Silence. He described driving that night in October 1987. Said he had been drinking. Said he saw Clara walking alone. Slowed down. Offered a ride. She refused. He admitted he followed her for a short distance. Not aggressively, he insisted. Not violently. But long enough to frighten her. Long enough to establish proximity. "She thought I was going to hurt her," he said quietly. "I didn't touch her. I swear." He claimed he drove away before she reached the creek. The implication hung heavy. If true, it placed him at the edge of the crime scene timeline, close enough to terrify, perhaps close enough to transfer soil, possibly even incidental DNA, if there had been brief contact. But not, in his telling, the killer. He insisted someone else must have approached after he left. Someone who escalated what he began. Prosecutors reviewed the recording repeatedly. The admission did not exonerate him. It complicated him. Following a teenage girl at night, after drinking, on a road she would not survive. His defense during trial had presented him as detached, misidentified, nowhere near the event. Now he acknowledged proximity, interaction, fear. Clara's mother listened to the recording in a private room at the district attorney's office. She did not cry. She did not speak until it ended. "He wants to lessen his weight," she said softly. "Not mine." Harold Boone watched the footage alone. He studied Cutter's posture. The pauses. The micro-expressions between words. Confession narratives often fracture under scrutiny. Partial admissions sometimes mask fuller truths. But they can also reveal a need to reshape legacy before death. Boone returned to the evidence timeline again. If Cutter approached Clara, spoke to her, perhaps even grabbed her wrist briefly, DNA transfer under her fingernails could occur without murder. Soil transfer could occur if his tires drifted near the creek's edge while turning around. Fear could escalate her movements, leading her toward darker stretches of road. But defensive wounds had been significant. Blunt force trauma severe. Could a second attacker have intercepted her after Cutter left? The original investigation had never uncovered evidence of another vehicle at the scene. The tire impressions matched a single distinctive pattern. No overlapping tracks were documented in crime scene photographs. Still, the possibility, however remote, forced reconsideration. The district attorney convened a review panel quietly. Forensic experts revisited archived images yet again, enhanced them with technology unavailable even during prior reanalysis. They searched for secondary impressions, alternate shoe prints, overlooked shadows in grainy photographs. Nothing definitive emerged. The soil isotopic analysis remained consistent with Cutter's vehicle. The tire defect alignment remained singular. The DNA remained statistically aligned. And now, Cutter himself placed his truck on Maple Street, behind Clara, that night. Proximity tightened. Publicly, the prison admission was not released immediately. Officials debated whether it altered the legal standing of the conviction. Ultimately, they determined it did not undermine it. If anything, it reinforced opportunity and consciousness of guilt. But leaks are inevitable. Within weeks, fragments of Cutter's statement surfaced in online forums. Headlines returned briefly. Convicted killer admits following victim before murder. The nuance, his denial of the killing itself, was buried beneath impact. Millfield absorbed it with weary familiarity. For some, it ended lingering doubt. If he lied once about being nowhere near her, what else had he lied about? For others, it fueled fresh speculation about a second unknown figure, an unseen shadow in the timeline. Harold Boone returned once more to Johnson's Creek. The bank had shifted slightly over decades, erosion carving new angles into the soil. He imagined Clara walking faster after a truck slowed beside her. Imagined headlights casting elongated shadows. Imagined the vulnerability of 17. He did not romanticize possibility. He did not indulge conspiracy. He asked himself a single question: does this change the core convergence of evidence? No. If anything, it removed the last barrier of distance. Cutter's health declined steadily in the months that followed. No dramatic deathbed confession. No cinematic revelation of an accomplice. Just a man aging inside concrete walls, narrative narrowing as options dwindled. The anonymous letter from years earlier resurfaced briefly in Boone's mind. You got the right man, but not for the reason you think. Perhaps the reason had never been motive or mistaken identity. Perhaps it was this. The jury believed he was a predator who acted alone. Cutter now admitted to predatory behavior, just not the final act. Maybe the letter's author believed the chain of events was more complex, more layered. But complexity does not equal innocence. The review panel concluded its quiet examination. Official statement: no grounds for reopening the case. Conviction remains supported by cumulative forensic and circumstantial evidence. Life moved forward again. But this time, something subtle shifted inside Millfield. The narrative hardened, not into blind certainty, but into acceptance that absolute knowledge may never exist. That justice operates within probability, convergence, and the best reconstruction available. Clara's plaque remained steady beside the creek. Her name did not change. And as Raymond Cutter's heartbeat faltered behind prison walls, the small Texas town that once trembled under a cold case now stood with something steadier than certainty. It stood with endurance. The truth had been tested by time, by science, by doubt, by confession without confession. And still it held. Raymond Cutter died on a gray morning in late February, the sky over the prison yard flat and colorless, the kind of sky that gives nothing back. Official cause: cardiac complications. Time of death: 6:42 a.m. No final statement. No amended confession. No dramatic reversal. Just a line in a report. Millfield learned about it before noon. There were no sirens this time. No courthouse crowds. No cameras waiting for reaction shots. Death, unlike arrest, arrives quietly. It closes the mouth that might have spoken more. It seals whatever remained unsaid. Clara Whitmore's mother received the news in the same kitchen where she had once opened a certified letter about an appeal. She sat down slowly. Her hands rested on the table. No visible relief. No visible anger. He can't hurt anyone anymore, she said finally. It was not triumph. It was exhaustion. Harold Boone heard the news while trimming hedges in his front yard. He turned off the clippers, stood still for a long moment, and looked down the street at houses built after 1987, homes whose foundations had been poured long after Clara's final walk. Time had expanded around the case. It had not erased it. Cutter's death reignited the question that had followed the case like a low hum for years. Would the full truth ever be known? He had admitted following her, admitted frightening her, denied the killing. There would be no cross-examination now.
Non you affidavit.
No second trial in the court of public opinion. Whatever lived inside his memory of that night would remain locked behind concrete and silence. The district attorney's office issued a brief statement. The conviction in the murder of Clara Whitmore remains legally and forensically supported. The passing of the defendant does not alter the findings of the court. Formal, measured. But inside Millfield, the reaction was personal. Some residents visited the plaque by Johnson's Creek that evening. No organized vigil. Just individuals arriving quietly, leaving flowers, standing in stillness. The water moved slowly, reflecting a sky heavy with approaching rain. For a town that had once been defined by an unsolved mystery, the arc now felt complete in a way that had nothing to do with revenge. The cold case had been reopened,
Tested. Challenged.
reinforced, and now the only man ever convicted in connection with it was gone. Weeks later, Clara's mother made a decision that surprised many. She donated Clara's preserved college brochures, photographs, and personal journals to the local historical society, not to sensationalize the crime, but to archive the life interrupted. She was more than a case, she told them, more than evidence. The exhibit that followed was small, carefully curated. It did not display crime scene images. It displayed report cards, a prom corsage, dried and fragile, a notebook filled with teenage handwriting about future plans that never unfolded. The headline that once defined Millfield, "Cold Case Cracked," began to fade behind something quieter, remembrance without spectacle. Harold Boone attended the opening of the exhibit and stood before a photograph of Clara laughing, head tilted back, sunlight caught in her hair. He realized that for decades he had held her image as it appeared in forensic files, clinical, frozen in tragedy. This was different. This was motion. Youth. Potential. He felt something loosen inside him that had been tight since October 1987. Later that summer, heavy rains caused Johnson's Creek to swell beyond its banks. Water rushed over the low-lying grass where searchers once walked in lines, shoulder to shoulder. The plaque stood firm despite the surge, water curling around its base before receding. Millfield had weathered storms before. The anonymous letter was eventually transferred to long-term archival storage. Its author never identified. It remained a footnote, an unresolved whisper in an otherwise substantiated record. True crime forums eventually moved on. Documentaries shifted to fresher mysteries. Law students cited the Whitmore case as precedent in discussions of partial DNA admissibility and cumulative forensic convergence. They debated thresholds. They analyzed jury instructions. They examined the ethics of cold case revival. But in Millfield, the debate no longer carried heat. It carried history. On the 40th anniversary of Clara's death, the town held a moment of silence at the high school stadium before a Friday night game. Players removed their helmets. The crowd stood. No speech. No rehashing of evidence. Just quiet acknowledgement of a name that had once fractured their sense of safety. As the silence ended and the game resumed, life continued exactly as it had the night she disappeared, except different. Harder. Wiser. Harold Boone, older now, sat in the bleachers wrapped in a light jacket against the evening chill. He watched teenagers laugh, unaware of how fragile ordinary nights can be. He no longer replayed tire patterns in his mind. He no longer studied DNA charts. He carried something steadier. The understanding that justice is imperfect, but persistence matters. That doubt can test truth without destroying it. That cold cases are not simply about solving puzzles, they are about refusing to let names dissolve into statistics. Raymond Cutter's grave bore a simple marker in a cemetery far from Millfield. No crowd visited. No cameras lingered. His story ended in obscurity. Clara Whitmore's name, by contrast, remained spoken at the creek, at the Historical Society, at the stadium. The cold case that once shocked a small Texas town had traveled through suspicion, science, scrutiny, confession without confession, and death. And what remained was not spectacle. It was memory anchored by evidence. The creek still flows. The porch lights still glow. And in the quiet spaces between Friday night cheers and early morning birdsong, Millfield carries a truth earned over decades that even when answers arrive late, even when they are challenged and questioned and tested again, they can still stand. Not flawless, not cinematic, but strong enough to endure. Years pass the way they always do in small towns, quietly, without announcement. Children who once heard Clara Whitmore's name in whispers grew into adults who spoke it with clarity. The case had moved from shock to trial, to scrutiny, to death. It had survived documentaries, appeals, anonymous letters, partial admissions. It had endured the erosion of time. And then, long after most believed the story had settled into permanent history, something unexpected surfaced again. It wasn't a confession. It wasn't new DNA. It was a recording. During routine digitization of archived evidence, the Millfield Police Department began converting old cassette tapes from the late 1980s into secure digital files. Interviews, dispatch logs, background noise captured unintentionally in interrogation rooms that had long since been renovated. One tape, labeled simply October 12, 1987, Interview Room B, contained Cutter's second interview with detectives. The transcript had been used at trial. The audio itself had not been revisited in decades. When the technician enhanced the sound to remove static, something emerged beneath the primary conversation. Faint, almost lost in tape hiss. A second voice. Not in the room. On the tape. At first it sounded like distortion, an overlapping frequency artifact. But repeated filtering isolated a fragment during a moment when Cutter leaned back in his chair and the primary microphone shifted. A whisper. 3 words. She fought hard. The technician froze the waveform and replayed it. She fought hard. The phrase had not been transcribed in 1987. It did not appear in court records. The detectives interviewing Cutter had not reacted to it at the time, because it hadn't come from them. It had come from Cutter. Under his breath. Barely audible. The recording was sent for forensic audio analysis. Experts confirmed the phrase aligned with Cutter's vocal pattern, matching cadence and tone. It was not conclusive beyond all doubt. No degraded audio ever is, but the probability was high that the whisper originated from him. She fought hard. 3 words that did not align with a man claiming he never touched her. The discovery did not alter the legal status of the case.
Cutter was dead.
The conviction secure. But the psychological weight of it was undeniable. Harold Boone was called in to listen. He sat in a small soundproof room at the department, headphones pressed against ears that had aged alongside the case. The technician played the enhanced segment.
Static.
Chair movement. Breathing. Then soft, almost swallowed by tape hiss. She fought hard. Boone closed his eyes. In 1987, detectives had been focused on overt statements, on denials, on inconsistencies. They did not have digital enhancement tools capable of isolating whispers buried beneath analog noise. Now, decades later, technology had pulled something from the past that no one knew had been captured. Clara's mother was informed gently. She chose to hear it herself. When the whisper reached her ears, she did not gasp. She did not break. She simply nodded once, as if confirming something she had carried intuitively for years. He knew, she said quietly. He always knew. The department debated releasing the audio publicly. Ultimately, they chose restraint. The purpose of justice is not spectacle. The recording was logged, authenticated, archived. But word spread. In Millfield, the phrase circulated in hushed tones. She fought hard. It reframed everything. The defensive wounds. The broken fingernails. The partial DNA beneath them.
The soil.
The tire defect. The late-night truck wash. The partial admission of following her. It stitched the narrative tighter. Not with drama, but with gravity. For Boone, the whisper was not triumph. It was confirmation of something he had sensed since the beginning. Clara had not gone quietly. She had resisted. She had left evidence beneath her nails that would outlive her attacker. Technology had finally allowed her resistance to be heard. As Autumn returned to Millfield once more, the Historical Society added a small plaque beside Clara's exhibit. It did not mention Cutter. It did not describe the crime. It bore a single engraved line. She fought hard. Visitors paused longer before that display. Not because it sensationalized tragedy, but because it honored strength. The cold case that had once been defined by absence of answers, absence of certainty, had, over decades, accumulated layers of confirmation. Each new advancement in science had not unraveled it. It had reinforced it. Partial DNA became stronger probability. Soil isotopes narrowed geography. Vehicle records resurfaced from dust. A whispered admission emerged from analog static. Not one piece alone. Convergence. Millfield no longer flinched at the mention of 1987. The story had evolved from horror to cautionary tale to testament. It had shaped policy, education, memory. On a crisp Friday night, under stadium lights that felt brighter than those decades ago, a new generation took the field. Parents watched from bleachers. Porch lights glowed in neighborhoods beyond the stadium. Harold Boone sat once more among the crowd, older than he ever imagined he'd be when the case began. He did not think about tire grooves anymore. He did not replay timelines. He thought about resilience. About how a 17-year-old girl's fight left microscopic traces strong enough to echo across 40 years. About how a town that once feared it would never know the truth now carried it with steady hands. The creek continued its patient movement through limestone and shadow. The wind carried the sound of cheering across Maple Street. And in the quiet spaces between past and present, one truth remained, no longer trembling, no longer debated. She fought hard. And she was never forgotten. The whisper should have been the final echo. For a while it was, she fought hard. 3 words lifted from the static of 1987 and carried into a town that had already buried, retried, dissected, and endured its tragedy. The phrase settled into Millfield's vocabulary like something always known but never spoken aloud. It was printed in the local paper's anniversary column. It was quoted carefully, respectfully by a high school valedictorian speaking about resilience. It became less about him and more about her. And then the ground shifted again. It happened during a routine expansion project along County Road 14, less than a mile from Johnson's Creek. Construction crews were widening the shoulder after years of minor runoff damage. Excavators bit into soil that had not been disturbed since the late 1980s. At first, it was dismissed as scrap, a rusted length of metal, partially fused with earth.
Bent.
Corroded. Unremarkable. Until someone noticed the shape. It wasn't random debris. It was a tire iron. The foreman contacted local authorities out of caution more than suspicion. In a town like Millfield, you don't ignore objects pulled from ground that has history. The location mattered. Less than a mile from where Clara's body had been found. Close enough to matter. The area had been searched in 1987, but search grids were human. Imperfect. The terrain had shifted over decades of rain and sediment. Objects sink. Evidence migrates. The tire iron was bagged, logged, transferred to the lab. Rust complicates everything. Decades underground erase fingerprints. Destroy biological traces. But shape survives corrosion. Forensic technicians compared the dimensions of the recovered iron to the standard issue tool included with 1980s Ford pickup trucks. Raymond Cutter had owned a 1983 Ford F-150. Records confirmed it. His truck had never been recovered intact. It was sold years after the murder, passed through multiple owners, eventually scrapped. The original tire iron was never cataloged into evidence because investigators at the time had no reason to believe it was missing.
Until now.
The recovered tool's dimensions matched factory specifications for that model year. That alone meant nothing conclusive. Thousands of identical tools existed across Texas in 1987. But then came the detail that tightened the air in the lab. A slight manufacturing defect. A shallow ridge near the handle base, an imperfection documented in a small batch produced in early 1983 at a specific plant. It had been the subject of a minor recall notice, largely ignored because the flaw did not affect performance. Vehicle maintenance records from Cutter's truck included a handwritten notation from 1984, recall tool replaced declined. He had declined replacement. The defect described in the recall bulletin aligned with the ridge observed on the recovered iron. Probability narrowed. Not certainty, but narrowing. The iron was tested for microtrace elements. Soil embedded in corrosion layers was compared to archived samples from Johnson's Creek. Consistency appeared again, limestone-heavy composition, matching mineral ratios. Blunt force trauma had been the primary cause of Clara's death. The murder weapon was never definitively recovered. Until now, perhaps. The district attorney's office faced a question layered with legal finality. What do you do with new physical evidence when the convicted man is dead? You document. You confirm. You protect the integrity of the record. Harold Boone stood once more beside Johnson's Creek as investigators mapped the precise recovery location. Orange flags marked coordinates. Cameras clicked, not for broadcast, but for chain of custody preservation. Boone looked at the excavation site and imagined rain pushing soil inch by inch over decades, burying metal deeper with each season. He imagined someone in October 1987 stepping out of a truck in the dark, adrenaline surging, weapon in hand. Then panic. Then disposal. A throw into brush. A decision made in seconds that would remain hidden for 40 years. Until machinery clawed it back into daylight. Clara's mother was informed gently, again. She listened to the explanation about manufacturing defects and mineral composition and statistical likelihoods. She asked only one question. Does this change anything? Legally, no. Emotionally, yes. Because doubt, however faint, had always hovered in corners. The anonymous letter, the partial admission, the absence of a definitive weapon. The iron filled that space. Not with spectacle, with weight. News of the discovery leaked within days. This time, national outlets picked it up. Possible murder weapon found in decades-old Texas cold case. Headlines pulsed again. Commentators debated coincidence versus convergence. Former skeptics fell quiet. Forensic analysts conducted impact testing using analog bone models to compare wound patterns documented in the autopsy report. The curvature and dimensions aligned with remarkable precision. Still, officials avoided theatrical language. They used words like consistent with, highly probable, convergent. Science does not shout. It accumulates. In Millfield, the reaction was different this time. There was no frenzy. No reopening of old divisions. Just a collective exhale that felt deeper than any before it. The case had been tested by time, by appeal, by documentary scrutiny, by audio enhancement. And now by Earth itself. The ground had kept its silence for 4 decades. Now it had spoken. At a small ceremony by the creek, unpublicized, attended only by family and a handful of officials, the recovered tire iron was not displayed. It remained secured in evidence storage. Instead, the focus remained where it always should have been. Clara. Her mother placed a hand against the plaque. She fought hard, she whispered again. The phrase no longer felt like a fragment of a killer's breath. It felt like a declaration. Harold Boone watched the water move past limestone banks that had witnessed everything and revealed nothing until now. He understood something with clarity that comes only after long pursuit. Truth is not a single revelation. It is sedimentary, layer upon layer.
Pressure over time.
Sometimes the final layer is not explosive. It is solid. Raymond Cutter lay in an unvisited grave far from the creek. The tool believed to have ended Clara's life sat catalogued, measured, documented. The evidence chain, once questioned, now extended from fingernails to tire grooves to isotopic soil to whispered words to rusted steel. Convergence complete. As evening settled over Millfield, porch lights flickered on across Maple Street. The stadium lights in the distance hummed before illuminating another Friday night game. Life, persistent and ordinary, continued. But beneath it ran a current stronger than shock, stronger than speculation. A cold case had once fractured this town. Time, science, and patience had rebuilt it. And from beneath 40 years of earth, the last missing piece had risen. Not to sensationalize the past, but to anchor it. The creek flowed. The wind moved through cypress branches. And the silence that followed was no longer uncertainty. It was closure, earned the hard way. Closure is a dangerous word. Millfield learned that the hard way. When the tire iron surfaced from the soil near County Road 14, when forensic reports aligned its defect ridge with a declined recall notice from 1984, when impact modeling mirrored fractures documented in Clara Whitmore's autopsy, the town felt something subtle. Not celebration. Not vindication. Something heavier. Final. For months, nothing moved. Then the lawsuit arrived. It was filed not by Raymond Cutter, he was long buried, but by his younger sister, Elaine Mercer. A civil action against the county. Wrongful conviction. Posthumous defamation. Emotional damages tied to what she described as a cascade of speculative reinforcement masquerading as certainty. The filing hit like a sudden gust through a door everyone thought was locked. Elaine had remained silent for decades. She had not attended trials, had not spoken to press. She lived 3 counties away, changed her last name, built a life separate from Millfield shadow. But the rediscovery of the tire iron brought everything back into headlines. And she stepped forward. Her claim was precise. The cumulative evidence had created narrative momentum. Once suspicion fixed on her brother, every subsequent finding had been interpreted through that lens. Partial DNA became guilt. Soil became presence at murder. A whisper became confession. A rusted tool became weapon. Convergence, she argued, can also be confirmation bias. The county's legal team responded swiftly. The conviction had survived appeal. Survived documentary scrutiny. Survived Cutter's own partial admissions. Survived technological reanalysis across decades. But a civil courtroom operates differently than a criminal one. The question would not be whether Cutter was guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. It would be whether the investigation had been conducted with reckless disregard for alternative possibilities. Millfield felt the old tremor return. Not because the case was weak, because it was alive again. Harold Boone was subpoenaed to testify. He had long retired from active duty. His hair now silver, posture slower but still upright. When he entered the courthouse, cameras waited, not in swarms, but enough to signal that the cold case still carried gravity beyond county lines. Inside, Elaine Mercer sat composed, hands folded. She did not resemble her brother in any obvious way. Her expression was not accusatory. It was resolute. Her attorney presented a theory familiar to true crime audiences: tunnel vision. Early focus on Cutter due to proximity and minor past complaints. Pressure to resolve a community-shocking murder. Gradual layering of evidence interpreted through initial bias. They called forensic experts who spoke about the limitations of partial DNA in the late 1980s. About soil transfer being common in rural Texas. About how audio enhancement decades later can introduce artifact distortions. Each argument alone was not devastating. Together, they aimed to create doubt, not about guilt necessarily, but about process. Boone took the stand. He did not raise his voice. He did not dramatize. He walked the jury through timelines, explained how Cutter had not been the only suspect, how other persons of interest were interviewed and cleared through alibi verification, how the tire impressions at the scene were measured before Cutter's vehicle was ever impounded, how the soil samples were collected from multiple control locations. He acknowledged uncertainty where it existed. He did not claim perfection. No investigation is flawless, he said evenly. But this one was thorough. And every new advancement tested it again. The plaintiff's attorney pressed him on the whisper. Detective Boone, is it not true that the phrase, "she fought hard," could be interpreted as commentary rather than confession? It could, Boone replied. And is it not possible the recovered tire iron belonged to another identical truck? It is possible, Boone said again. The attorney paused, sensing traction. Then what makes you certain? Boone leaned slightly forward. Because each possibility must stand against all the others simultaneously, he said. Individually, they can be explained away. Together, they align in one direction. The courtroom stilled. Convergence again. Clara's mother did not attend every session. She chose her moments carefully. When she did appear, she did not look at Elaine Mercer. Not out of hostility, but because grief recognizes grief, and there was something unbearable about seeing it reflected from the other side. Elaine eventually took the stand herself. My brother was not a perfect man, she admitted.
He drank.
He made women uncomfortable. But being a flawed man is not the same as being a murderer. Her voice did not shake. He maintained he did not kill her, even at the end. The room absorbed that. The trial stretched for weeks. Expert testimony dissected isotopic ratios, manufacturing batch records, forensic audio probability thresholds. Statistical language filled the air, dense and clinical. Outside, Johnson's Creek continued its patient flow, indifferent to arguments about what happened on its banks. When closing arguments arrived, the county attorney did not paint Cutter as monstrous. He did not lean on emotion. He leaned on accumulation. Justice is not built on a single brick, he told the jury. It is built on structure. Remove one element, the structure stands. Remove two, it stands. Remove all at once, and you are left with nothing. In this case, the structure remains. The jury deliberated for 3 days. Millfield waited again. It felt like 1989 all over, except older, heavier, less volatile. When the verdict came, it was concise. The county had not acted with reckless disregard. The investigation had met standards of its time and had been reinforced, not contradicted, by subsequent advancements. Civil claim denied. Elaine Mercer did not react outwardly. She nodded once, gathered her papers, and left the courtroom without speaking to press. There would be no further appeals. Her attorney later released a short statement acknowledging the decision while maintaining that legal standards and moral certainty are not always identical. Millfield exhaled once more. But something had shifted subtly. The lawsuit had forced the town to examine not just the crime, but its own desire for answers. To confront how easily narratives can solidify. To understand that justice requires scrutiny, even decades later. Harold Boone visited Johnson's Creek alone after the verdict. The air was cool. Wind brushed across water, breaking reflections into fragments. He did not feel vindicated. He felt tested. And still standing. The cold case that once shocked a small Texas town had now survived arrest, conviction, appeal, documentary doubt, whispered revelation, buried weapon, and civil challenge. Each time, it had been forced back into the light. Each time it had held. Clara Whitmore's plaque caught the late afternoon sun, letters sharp against weathered bronze. She fought hard. The words carried new dimension now, not just about a struggle in the dark, but about a fight for truth across decades. A fight through skepticism and scrutiny, and the relentless passage of time. As evening settled over Maple Street, porch lights flickered on one by one. Millfield did not claim perfection. It claimed persistence. And in the quiet space between doubt and certainty, between accusation and endurance, the case no longer felt fragile. It felt forged. By the time the 15th chapter of the story began to write itself, Millfield no longer reacted with shock. It reacted with vigilance. The civil lawsuit had closed without overturning anything, but it left behind a residue, a heightened awareness that truth must withstand pressure, not avoid it. The cold case had survived legal fire. The structure still stood. And yet, something about endurance invites one final test. It came from a place no one expected. A university research lab. In 2028, a team specializing in advanced forensic genomics published a paper on next-generation microsample reconstruction, technology capable of reassembling degraded DNA fragments once considered unusable. The breakthrough centered on probabilistic genotyping powered by machine learning models trained on decades of forensic casework. Millfield's archived evidence qualified. The partial DNA recovered from beneath Clara Whitmore's fingernails had always been strong, but not